everybody. Welcome to the V-IPL webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kara Moncrief, and I'm the Clinical Communications Director for Viora. And we're going to be going through the IPL today, which is going to take about 3 hours, could go 4 hours though, depending on if you guys have any questions. So at the very end, if you guys have questions, there's two ways of asking them. One, you can put them in the chat below and I will read them all at the end. And then two, I will open it up at the very end so you can unmute yourself and actually ask the questions that you guys have, which I prefer because it's nice to have that communication. Okay, so let me just mute everybody really quick before we get started. All right. Oops. Okay, so if you guys have your workbook at home in front of you, it would be nice to pull it out just to take notes. If not, you can just take notes yourself. Additionally, we are recording this webinar and all the ones of the past. So you guys can always access those at VioraOnlineAcademy.com. So those will be there for you. All right, so we'll get started. Okay, the IPL and everything that it can treat. So we can treat for hair removal, hyperpigmentation, skin rejuvenation, vascular lesions, fine lines and wrinkles, and acne clearance. So it does a lot. Let me just stop this video really quick. It does a lot, and the reason why it does so much is because it is a light-based technology. However, it is not a laser, where a laser only utilizes one wavelength, and when you only have one wavelength, you may only be able to target 2, maybe 3 chromophores. Sorry, just stopping somebody else's video. And with the IPL, we are utilizing the full visible spectrum, even in a little bit into the infrared spectrum. So that's why we're able to target so many different chromophores and why the IPL is so very popular and always will be, because it brings so much revenue to you guys, because you can see why, the ability to treat so much. And then we're going to go through chromophores and things like that as we go. So now we'll get into the science of it. So the IPL uses light and wavelengths. So light is the electromagnetic radiation of any wavelength. So we are able to really vary in size of our wavelengths depending on, what do we want to treat? Do we want to treat superficial hyperpigmentation, or do we want to treat for a deep hair follicle? So we have either short wavelengths and long wavelengths. Now, how do we get short and long wavelengths? It is how the wavelengths are really moving. It's the frequency of them. So let's take how many times does a wavelength peak in the matter of a second, where a long wavelength is a very low frequency. It's actually slower and has time to get deeper into the tissue, where a short wavelength has a very high, fast frequency, so it's staying very superficial in the skin. So again, if we're wanting to treat for a deep hair follicle, we need our longer wavelengths. We want to treat superficial hyperpigmentation, we need our shorter wavelengths, because that's where we're putting the heat in the tissue, right where our cosmetic concern is. So here's a photo of the electromagnetic spectrum, the EM spectrum for short. If you were on with us on Tuesday, we discussed radio frequency, which is also part of this EM spectrum. But today, sorry, let me go back. Almost everything in life that's surrounding us is part of this EM spectrum. Our cell phones, radio waves, TV, UV outside, microwaves, and then also the colors that our eye is perceiving. The color that your eye is perceiving of my shirt being brown or black or white. So we are primarily using that same spectrum, the visible spectrum, for the IPL. It's really the colors of the rainbow. We also use a little bit into the infrared, and we'll talk about why that's a positive when we get into skin rejuvenation. So here's the colors of the rainbow. We have violet, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. And our shorter wavelengths, let me just stop somebody's video here. Okay. Our shorter wavelengths are falling into the violets. You can see 380 nanometers to 420 nanometers. Then we get a bit deeper at 420 nanometers to 490. And then deeper is going to be green, then yellow, then orange. And our deepest or longest wavelengths are within the visible spectrum are our reds. So 625 nanometers to 760. So what are these numbers? It's the filters that you put into the handpiece. So we'll go through the filters in depth as well. And then here's just a nice little photo of showing our skin. This is the epidermis, the papillary dermis, the reticular dermis. You can see our hair follicles, our vascular, and just an idea of how deep those wavelengths go. Okay, so what is IPL? IPL is intense pulse light. And again, it's very different than a laser, where a laser is only utilizing one wavelength. The IPL utilizes the full visible spectrum. And IPL is based on the principle of selective photothermolysis. So I'll break that down. Photo meaning light, thermo meaning heat, and lysis meaning destruction. So that's what we're doing. We're taking the handpiece, which I have right here actually. We're taking the handpiece, and when we put it on our tissue, this is a light-based technology. When we put it on the tissue, we develop heat. And if we can develop enough heat, we can get coagulation or necrosis or destruction of our target. So really death. We want death to the hair follicle. We want death to the acne, death to the hyperpigmentation, so on and so forth. The reason why we say selective photothermolysis is, do we want that handpiece, when we put it on the skin, to have coagulation or necrosis of everything that it touches? No, we just want death to the hair follicle or the hyperpigmented lesion, but not the surrounding tissue. So we have ways of doing that where it's selecting the chromophore, keeping the surrounding tissue safe. We have two biological responses with the IPL. We have photothermal and photochemical. Most everything that you're treating with the IPL is photothermal. And there's one thing that's photochemical, and that is going to be acne. So we'll talk about how it's more of a chemical response than a thermal response when we get into acne later on in the workbook. So chromophores, that is our target with the IPL, because a chromophore is a light sensitive molecule. So that's what we need to go for, is something that's light sensitive. And we have 4 chromophores that we can target. First one being melanin. Melanin is how we're able to treat for hair removal. It's the pigment within the hair follicle. And this is why we cannot treat blonde or gray hair. Additionally, like strawberry blonde hair won't respond very well. If somebody has that deep red auburn hair, there's more of a brown component to it, then they can respond much better. Also, it's the overabundant amount of melanin in our skin. So when we damage our skin from the sun and we get solar lentigo or melasma, or hormonal concerns like melasma. Second one being hemoglobin. So this is how we're able to treat for all of our vascular lesions. So think broken telangiectasias, think rosacea, things like that. And we'll go through all of the things that are vascular related, are pigmentation related. Next one is porphyrin. It's spelled P-O-R-P-H-Y-R-I-N. I hope I have that right. So porphyrin is found in P. acne bacteria. That's how we're able to treat acne. And then the last one being H2O, or water. And what do we have a lot of in our skin? Hopefully water. So water is our big target to give overall skin rejuvenation. So now I'm going to talk about right here at the bottom, thermal relaxation time. However, I'm not going to go into it in great detail because I actually talk about it later when we move into pulse duration. But I do want to note, if you are on your workbook and taking notes, this really is the most important thing to know when you're dealing with IPL and lasers. If you understand TRT, thermal relaxation time, you can understand any laser or IPL put in front of you. And TRT, well, you know what, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait until we go into pulse duration to really get into detail of it. But just make a note there that it does mention it in the workbook there, and you can always reference back to it. Okay, so next we're gonna go into the cutoff filters. So our max energy fluence with the IPL, it goes up to 35 joules. And we're really not working that high. I don't think I ever have. The only time you're really working up that high is for hair removal on lighter skin types. Other than that, you're going to be much lower in your energy. And then we have 6 cutoff filters. So I'll go through them. I'm going to go through them from this photo here, from left to right, which is actually the most superficial to the deepest penetration. So our first one, 415 nanometers, and it says AC on the filter, and that stands for acne clearance. Let me just stop this video here. There we go. So it says AC on there. It stands for acne clearance. In specific, it's using blue light. And then the next one, 530 nanometers, it says VP on the filter, and that stands for vascular and pigmentation. That is going to be more so for superficial vascular and pigmentation. And then next one, we have 570 nanometers, which is, it says HR on it, hair removal. This is going to be your more superficial filter for hair. Next one is 580 nanometers. It says SR on it, which stands for skin rejuvenation. However, it also doubles for deep pigment and deep vascular. And we're going to go through the filter choices for whichever indication that you would be treating. And then next one, 630 nanometers and 755 nanometer is both HR hair removal. 630 is just a bit deep, a bit more superficial than 755, whereas 755 is your deepest depth of penetration. We did not have the 755 in the past. We added it on recently. Reason being is it is much safer to use a much longer wavelength for darker skin. So we wanted another option to be able to treat for hair removal for your skin type 5s, Indian skin, or skin type 6, African skin. So this is just going to be a bit safer. The reason why it's safer is because our melanocytes, that's what produces our pigment for our skin. Our melanocytes are pretty superficial. They're right at the bottom of the epidermis. So if someone has darker skin, it doesn't mean, because I'm more fair skin, it doesn't mean that they have more melanocytes than I do. It just means that the melanocytes they do have produce more pigment. So if we use a shorter wavelength right where their melanocytes are, because their melanocytes are superficial, that's when we get into more of a challenging scenario, because really, you know, the light wanting to target their melanocytes, but also whatever you're trying to treat. Let me just stop some of this video here. Oh, it went away. So when they come in for hair removal, it's just an added extra safety to have a longer wavelength, because the heat is going to penetrate deep where the root of the hair follicle is and want to more so bypass their superficial melanin. Additionally, the longer the wavelength is, the less melanin absorption we have. So we have those two added components there. Okay, so those are our 6 filters, and the filters work, here, I'll just show you the box here. So here's the box of filters, and then here's one of the filters. So the filters just slide into the actual handpiece here. I have one inside. So they just slide right into the handpiece, and really it's kind of making the IPL more like a laser almost, where we want specific wavelengths. The filters also will block out any unwanted wavelengths, so harmful wavelengths that could be harmful to the tissue, and then unwanted wavelengths. So if we want to go deep, we don't want those more superficial wavelengths like 530, 570, 580 targeting the skin. We want to, you know, bypass that and really focus deep. So that's what the filters are used for. Okay, next thing we'll talk about is pulse shape or pulse structure. So the original IPLs that came on the market in the 1990s, they were really, really uncomfortable. And the reason for that is because we had a free discharge peak of energy. And still some of the IPLs that are manufactured today have this. And what that means is, I'm going to show you this picture here in the middle. The free discharge peak of energy, it's how the handpiece really recharges, and then when we hit the trigger, releases the light. And it wasn't very controlled. So we would have this huge peak or spike of energy. And that is what was creating any type of unwanted burns, and also that really hot rubber band snap to the skin. So what ours is a smooth square pulse shape. So really what we're doing is we're taking out this high snap peak of energy, and we're delivering it in a very steady, controlled way. So we're not going to have any unwanted burns. Of course, you could still burn somebody if you're not using it properly, but you know, any unwanted burns if we do have the system set properly. And additionally, we're not getting that really strong rubber band heat snap that we had in the past, or some other systems still have. So comfort. This is something that the engineers did to the handpiece. You'll probably never talk about this with clients. Okay, let me just mute all just in case. All right, so now we'll go to the next page. Let's see. And the next two topics that we're going to talk about really are the most complex. So if they don't make sense, then just let, you can even like put something on the comment box and say, hey, can you explain this in a bit more detail? Because it is the most complex, so I want to make sure that it really makes sense for everybody. So the first thing we'll talk about is pulse configuration. We have 3 pulse configurations for 3 different reasons. We have a single, a multiple, and a rapid. We have this for safety, comfort, and efficacy. But I'm going to talk about the safety of it first, because that's really the most important thing to know. And that's really why we're choosing our different pulse configurations. So the single, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just one single flash of light. So when we hit the trigger, one flash of light comes out, nothing more than that. Multiple is 3 sub-pulses within that one flash of light. So when you hit the trigger, it actually looks like just a single flash. But if you put your glasses on and really look at the light, you can actually see it flickering, because it is. It's going on the skin, off, on the skin, off, back on. And then I'll explain why it does that. And then rapid is 10 sub-pulses within that one flash of light. Okay, so single pulse. So single pulse is going to be good for skin types 1, 2, and 3. The reason why is because I'm going to take myself for an example. I'm a skin type 2, so I'm more fair. And with me, my melanocytes don't produce a lot of melanin. So when I put the handpiece on somewhere, like let's say I want to do hair removal on my arms, and I put the handpiece there, it's not hard for the IPL to find the dark pigment of the hair follicle, because my surrounding tissue is fair. It does not want to really target my tissue at all. It wants to go straight to the chromophore, which is the pigment in the hair follicle. So it's a bit more aggressive. And I want you to think of single pulse like a Mike Tyson punch. You get into the ring with Mike Tyson and it can be a one-punch knockout. He's a heavyweight boxer, so he's aggressive, he's strong. Now, multiple pulse is 3 sub-pulses within that one flash of light. So this is going to be good for skin types 1, 2, 3, because those skin types can use this one as well, but additionally skin type 4. So I want you to think of like Hispanic skin or Asian skin usually fall into skin type 4. So with them, okay, let's take Jennifer Lopez as an example. She comes in for hair removal, and I use Jennifer Lopez because everyone knows her usually around the world, and we can tell she has darker skin. So she comes in for hair removal, and ooh, it's a bit more challenging. Does the handpiece want to focus exactly right at her hair and nowhere else? Not always. Because she has darker skin, it also wants to focus on her tissue. So how do we keep her safe, but also still get the efficacious results with that hair follicle? So with the multiple pulse, we're looking at this photo right here. It's going on the skin, off, back on the skin, off, and back on. So what that's doing is it's hitting the hair follicle, hitting the hair follicle, hitting the hair follicle. And a hair follicle is teeny, teeny, tiny. So when a hair follicle gets hit with heat, it traps and holds in heat. So a hair follicle will hold heat for 40 to 100 milliseconds, where our surrounding tissue, when it first initially gets hit with heat, only holds heat for 3 to 7 milliseconds. That is a huge difference in number. So now you can see when the hair follicle gets hit, it traps in heat and it holds it for much longer. And it hits again, it traps in heat, gets hit again, and it traps in even more heat. So now we get coagulation and necrosis. But because our surrounding tissue cools faster, that little bit of off time in between those subpulses is allowing the surrounding tissue to cool to not create any type of burn. So I'm going to give an analogy. Let's take our oven and turn it on to 400 degrees. And we take a sheet of tin foil or aluminum foil and put it in the oven. And then we put a solid wrought iron in the oven. And we leave them in there for, I don't know, an hour or 2. Which one are you going to feel more comfortable pulling out with your hand? Most likely aluminum foil, right? We would never grab that solid wrought iron out with our hand. We would have third-degree burns probably. But if you bake, you know you can leave aluminum foil in the oven for a long time without it getting too hot. So you can easily pull it out with your hand. And the reason being is it's a large surface area. Sorry, let me stop this person really quick. Okay. The aluminum foil, it's a large surface area. So it's easy to pull that out with your hand. It never gets too hot because the heat is constantly dissipating from it. So think of that as your skin. Your skin is like the aluminum foil. It's a large surface area, so it never gets too hot. But the solid wrought iron does. That's like your hair follicle. It traps in the heat. So we're able to destroy the hair follicle, keeping surrounding tissue safe by using this with darker skin. Let me just erase one more time, you guys. I'm so sorry. Okay. Now we'll go to, so that was good for skin types 1 through 4. Now we'll go to the rapid pulse. Rapid pulse is good for all skin types, even 5s and 6s. So why? We have 10 subpulses within that one flash of light. So you can think about that the heat is going on, but then off the skin 10 times within that one flash of light. So I want you to think of multiple pulse like a middleweight boxer, Roy Joe Jones Jr. He's a middleweight boxer if you know who he is. When you get in the ring with him compared to Mike Tyson, it's maybe not a 1-punch knockout. Maybe it's a 1, 2, and then 3 punches and they're knocked out. So I want you to think of that as the aggressiveness, the single compared to multiple. Then I want you to think of rapid pulse like Manny Pacquiao. He's a featherweight boxer. So it's not going to be nearly as aggressive as Mike Tyson. Maybe it takes 8, 9, then 10 punches to knock something out, just like Manny Pacquiao if you got in the ring with him. So there's a huge difference in the way that heat will build in the skin on a rapid compared to a single. So that is the safety of it, and that's really why you're using pulse configuration. Am I a skin type 1, 2, or 3? Single. Am I a skin type 4? Multiple. Am I a skin type 5 or 6? Rapid. So that's what you're going to go to when you're using this for skin types. But you can see that skin types 1, 2, and 3 can be used with any of these. So why would you choose one over another? Efficaciously, you would choose single. It's harder to build heat on lighter skin types anyways. So the single pulse is going to be a lot more efficacious for you. However, let me just stop somebody's video really quick. There we go. However, if you have a patient coming in and they have never had a treatment done before and they're really nervous, so you know their pain tolerance is already shot, and let's say they're a skin type 2 and you start using the single pulse structure and they're going, this is horrible. This is, you're working your energy up and they're jumping all over the place and I'm never coming back for another treatment. Okay, you don't want to lose them as a client. So you can move them to multiple. It will feel night and day different to them, so it'll be more comfortable. You may need to work a bit longer to get to your endpoint doing additional passes on the skin, but you can really save that client and save yourself from losing that client. Usually they get used to the sensation, so you can end up bringing them back to a single pulse eventually. Okay, so that's the safety of it, the efficacious part of it, and the comfort part of it. Any questions there? Okay, we'll move on. All right, so now we will go into pulse duration. So pulse duration it's the most complex thing to learn when you're first learning this, to wrap your mind around it. And the reason being is our brains naturally want to go to the larger the number, the more aggressive something is. And that is the case for energy, joules of energy. If I'm using 40 joules of energy compared to 20 joules of energy, of course 40 joules of energy is going to be a lot more aggressive than 20. However, with this, we're dealing with numbers, but it is the speed in which we deliver those 20 joules of energy. So really the higher the number, the safer something is, because the higher the number, the slower you're delivering it. Where the shorter the number, you're delivering it very quickly, so it's more of a really hard punch to the skin. So just keep that in mind. If you really are just starting out with IPL, and once this craziness is over within our world and you go back to your office and you're like, okay, you guys, let's start practicing and let's stay safe and let's stay at 10 milliseconds compared to 50 milliseconds, that's going to get you into trouble. You're probably going to end up accidentally burning someone. Why? Because you just made that pulse duration so short and you put it into the tissue really quickly without, and that's your test. That could end up burning somebody. So 50 milliseconds is going to be much safer. So I just wanted to lock that in your minds before we move on. Okay, so why do we have pulse duration? It's so important for many reasons. So I'm going to really keep it simple. I'm going to say that we're using 10 joules of energy and we have an option between 10 milliseconds and 50 milliseconds. Actually, let's change it to 20 joules of energy so the numbers aren't the same. So we're using 20 joules of energy and we have a pulse duration between 10 milliseconds and 50 milliseconds. Okay, so why do we need that adjustability? For one, how dark and large is maybe the spot that you're treating, or how dark and coarse and dense is the hair that you're treating? Or let's take somebody's bikini area. A lot of females have very dark, coarse, dense hair. So there's a lot of pigment there. Therefore, there's a lot of chromophore there. Now let's take something on the opposite end. I'll just take myself. The hairs that most of us women have above the lip. Those are, sure, they're pigmented. We don't like them. It makes us look like we have a mustache, but they're very fine and very light. So there's a huge difference in how much chromophore I have here compared to a woman's dark, dense, coarse bikini hair. So that is where we need that controllability. With my hair above the lip, those are very fine hairs, so it's harder to treat them, one, because they cool much faster. So when I put the heat into them, they cool quickly because there's not a lot of chromophore there to really hold on to the heat. Now let's take bikini hair, that dark, dense, coarse bikini hair. There's so much chromophore in that area that it's not hard to heat at all, and it traps in heat and it holds in heat really well. So I'll give you guys an analogy. Let's take a large stock pot of water and a small pan of water. We put them both to a rapid boil and then we turn the heat off. Which one is going to cool faster? It's going to be the small one, right? And why is that? It's just because there's not a lot of volume in it. There's not a lot of water. So if there's not a lot of water, then there's not a lot of water to hold on to heat. Where this large stock pot of water, and you can come back to it, I don't know, an hour later, and it's probably still hot or at least warm. Reason being, there's just more concentration of water to hold the heat. So same thing with everything that you're treating. If there's a large concentration of pigment in the area, it's going to hold on to heat. So, and it's also going to heat quickly. So if I were to now treat the dark, dense, coarse bikini hair, would I be more 10 milliseconds or more 50 milliseconds, which is a lot slower delivery? It's going to be 50 milliseconds. Why? If I tried to treat it in 10 milliseconds, all that chromophore is going to absorb the heat all at the same time too quickly, and we're going to end up affecting the surrounding tissue with blisters. It's not hard to heat. You don't have to cram in the energy. It also traps in heat and holds in heat, so you would deliver it very slowly, more of a tap to the tissue. Now, the fine hairs that are still pigmented, but very fine and not coarse and dense like bikini hair, those are going to cool quickly because there's not a lot of chromophore in them. So with those, you're going to need to shorten the pulse duration to be able to get an efficacious treatment. So that goes for anything you're treating. Let's take a large dark birthmark. Would you treat that more at 50 milliseconds or more 10 milliseconds? It's going to be 50 milliseconds. If you did it in 10, that whole area is going to blister over. Now, if somebody has tiny little small solar lentigo spots on the face, then completely opposite, they're going to be harder to heat. Therefore, you have to get shorter with your pulse duration. I don't say to ever test at 10 milliseconds because a test is always needed, but also don't test at 50 milliseconds because you're not going to be anywhere close to the pulse duration you need to be at because those cool so fast. So you're more so testing at like 20 milliseconds or 15 milliseconds, somewhere closer to the 10 millisecond range. So that goes across the board for anything you're treating. So we'll go through this and we'll keep talking about it. But this is the TRT I was talking about, the thermal relaxation time. How long does a target hold on to heat for? Well, I can't look at, you know, let's say I have a spot on my face. I can't look at it and say, oh, that cools in 14.5 milliseconds. I have no idea. But I do know that I'm looking at it and it's small and light. So I know that it cools at a shorter millisecond. So that's where I would be on my range, the shorter millisecond range. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, you can ask a question. You can either raise your hand at the bottom of the screen, unless you're on your phone, and then I'm not sure how it works. But if you're on your computer, at the bottom of the screen, you can see that you can write in comments. You could raise your hand. Okay. Let's now move on to this page. So this is that analogy I gave you with the stock pots of water. I also spoke about the shorter the pulsation, the more aggressive it is. Oh, I want to give another analogy, talking about the aggressiveness of it, just so it really, you don't forget this. And a lot of people don't forget this analogy, which is nice, so it keeps them safe. So let's take Mike Tyson again, the boxer. And let's say he's been training for months and he's in the best shape. Let's say himself, like his muscle mass is 20 joules of energy, and he gets a great night's sleep the night before the fight, and he gets in the ring and his swing is really, really fast. Let's say it's 10 milliseconds. So he knocks the guy out because he's a strong man at 20 joules of energy, and his swing is quick at 10 milliseconds. So that's very aggressive. Now let's take Mike Tyson. He's still been training for months. He's still in great shape. The only difference is that he went out the night before and he didn't get any sleep. Now he gets in the ring and his punch is much, much slower because he's tired. Is he going to have the same effect on his component as he did at that very quick punch? No. So think of it like that. The longer you stretch that pulse duration out, the least aggressive, or the you're not going to be so much aggressive really with that. Was that good English? I'm not sure. And then when you shorten that pulse duration, that's when you become much more aggressive with your punch. So just wanted to give that analogy too. Here it talks about the penetration of different pulse durations. I kind of just want you to ignore it, to be honest with you. There's truth to it. So I'll tell you that there's truth to it, that a shorter pulse duration, 5 milliseconds, compared to a longer pulse duration, 25 milliseconds, that 5 milliseconds, it doesn't have as much time on tissue, so it doesn't go as deep. 25 milliseconds has more time on tissue, so it does go deeper. However, the reason why I want you to ignore that concept is because really what controls the depth, the big thing that controls the depth, are your filters. So when you put a specific filter in, you're already making sure that you can control that depth. A short pulse duration having a very high frequency stays superficial, where a longer wavelength has a low frequency, so it has time to get deeper. That's really what's controlling the depth. And the problem is, if your brain goes to, okay, I'm going to choose my pulse duration based on the depth I want to achieve, you can end up creating burns on somebody. Because really what the most important thing is how large and dark is something, or how small and light is something. That's your main concern. So really just jot that down as a note, because some people, our brains naturally will overcomplicate pulse duration almost with everybody when they're first learning this. And if you just write this note down, if something is small and light, short pulse duration. If something is large and dark, long pulse duration. That's all. Keep it that simple in your minds and you'll be fine. All right, so now we'll move on. Oh, one thing, sorry, I wanted to point out. So actually, I'll use this other page because it's a bigger photo. So here it is showing the screen. So on the right, that's our joules, where we can increase or decrease our joule, our energy level. On the left is our pulse configurations, single, multiple, and rapid. And in the center, that is our pulse duration, so our speed in which we're delivering it. Let's pretend like this number isn't here, and let's pretend like the single pulse is chosen. It would just show this one thing in the center because it's a single pulse. We can only control how quickly one single pulse is delivering into the tissue. So that is where you adjust. Now, If you did choose multiple, then another number will pop up, which is the thing right here down below. So you have a top number and you have a bottom number. So it looks a bit more complex, like, oh, what do I adjust? So I just want to mention that we do have intuitive parameters. So here it's hard to see, but this says that skin type 3 was selected. And here it says the hair color that we're treating is medium and the hair thickness that we're treating is medium. Okay, so the reason why we, let me go back. So because skin type 3 was chosen, it will naturally know intuitive parameters about how much cooling time a skin type 3 would need in between the subpulses. So that's what that bottom number is. So the multiple is chosen, which means it's going on the skin, off, on the skin, off, and back on the skin. So those 3 peaks that are hitting the tissue, that's the top number. That's how quickly we're controlling how quickly it's hitting the skin. The bottom number here are those 2 off times where you're allowing the surrounding tissue to cool to not create a burn on them. So that is really the last thing that you need to adjust, because it is intuitive and it does know about how much time a skin type 3 would need, for example, for cooling in between the subpulses. And by the way, skin type 3, you're usually using single pulse anyways. Skin type 4 is when you would be in this multiple, and then skin type 5 and 6, you would be in rapid. Okay, so that, I just wanted to show you that screen. Okay, so now we'll talk about the repetition rate and number of pulses per handpiece. So your repetition rate is how quickly does your handpiece work. So when you're in single and multiple, you're between 0.4 and 0.66 hertz. So that really, the math on that is that the flash lamp recharges and lets you release another pulse every 1.5 to 2.5 seconds. So you can actually think of it, just simplify it as every 2 seconds, you can release a pulse. When you're in rapid, you're a bit quicker, faster at 2 hertz. So that's 2 pulses per second. Now, number of pulses is how long your handpiece really works for. So it's 200,000 pulses per handpiece, and it counts down from 200,000. The reason why we needed to give a number on how many pulses you have in the handpiece is because it's a flash lamp. It's very similar to like a, it's a xenon lamp, but it's very similar to like, well, it's not similar to a light bulb in terms of how it works, but it's similar to a light bulb in terms of when I screw in a light bulb today, is it going to be as bright 5 years from now? No. Well, maybe nowadays because they're LED lights and they last forever, but let's just take a traditional light bulb. No, they dim over time. So when they dim, think of that with your flash lamp. It would dim, and then you would no longer have those efficacious treatments that you're needing. So that's why we give you 200,000. After 200,000, it really severely drops off, and then it would be like, does this thing work? You know, it's not really as aggressive as it should be. And we don't want to put you guys into that situation of, oh, it's taking me forever to get to my endpoints or do treatments. No, this is going to be much better than to just replace the handpiece. Okay, we're going to talk about three more things, and then we're going to take a bathroom break. It's always just nice to have a quick break, move around, breathe a bit, and then maybe get coffee, use the restroom, whatever you need to do without missing out on anything. All right, so now we'll talk about our spot sizes. So we have, I hope I grabbed the right box of filters because I have 2. I did. Okay, so we have, in your box, by the way, there's this little hole space here. Some people don't know what it's for. It's cut out to be the size of the small spot size. So you can keep your filters and the small spot size all in one box, which is nice. Okay, so we have a large spot size, which is a 6.4 centimeters squared. So really the math on that is 6 millimeters by 20 millimeters. So our large spot size is very, very large within the industry. So we can treat, you know, like a full man's back, the full woman's legs very fast because of our large spot size. And then the small spot size is used, and by the way, if you don't have one of these and you live in the US, because there's a lot of international our distributors and physicians around the world that are on the webinar, which we're so thankful and grateful for, because we know it is not the best time zone for you guys for this. So thank you so much for joining us. So if you guys are in the States though, you can order this on myviora.com. So that's only for the US customers. So US customers, myviora.com, and you can order the little small spot size. For the people overseas, then you can just contact your distributor to order the small spot size if you're needing it. And then what's really nice about the small spot size is to be able to treat like in between here, the nose, on the nose, bony curved areas, like small areas of the bikini. So it is always nice to have this. Okay, and then the small just clips onto the large. So this is what it looks like when it's on. And it just kind of reduces that large spot size. So it makes it really nice and easy to treat those small areas. Okay. We'll talk about probably my favorite thing to talk about. And this is our contact cooling system. So there's two reasons why it's my favorite thing to talk about. One of the reasons is that we are the only company that has cooling before, during, and after every pulse of light. The reason being is our engineers are brilliant and they incorporated two types of cooling within the handpiece. So we have a water cooling jacket, and that is why we put distilled water in our system. It's also why when you turn it on and hit ready, you can actually hear it. If you put your ear up, you can hear water running. So that's the water cooling jacket. And then additionally, we incorporated tech cooling, TEC, thermal electric cooling. If you guys were on Tuesday, I talked about this with the ST handpiece. Same, we have that thermal electric cooling in the ST. We put it into the IPL, where it's pushing cold air to the handpiece and pulling heat away at the same time. So the reason why we have cooling throughout the entire pulse, before, during, and after, is because of that tech cooling. So I'll explain. The water cooling jacket is right here, and it surrounds the flash lamp. So oh, my handpiece almost fell. Okay, so the part that connects to the system is just laying on my counter, so it almost fell. Yeah, that'd be horrible. Okay, so the flash lamp is right here. And the flash lamp, that's what activates and releases energy. And then the water cooling jacket is surrounding it. And then this is called the light guide, and it's a sapphire crystal. So remember, water is a chromophore. So if the flash lamp, if we hit the trigger and the flash lamp activated and the water cooling jacket was running during that time, all that would happen is the water would absorb the energy and it wouldn't actually come out to the patient. So the water cooling jacket is chilling the light guide before the flash of light. When you trigger, that water cooling jacket pops off and the tech cooling pops on. So it's pushing cold air. When you're done triggering, the water cooling jacket pops back on. So this is why we have that continuous cooling. Engineers, brilliant again. Okay, so this is how we have our cooling system. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that my IPL handpiece is staying on the counter as it should. Now we'll talk about the part where it's intuitive. So why do you need cooling? You need cooling to, one, protect the epidermis, especially for darker skin types. And then to protect the epidermis, to not create any burns like you're seeing here in this photo. So the additional thing I'm going to talk about is that our cooling is intuitive, meaning we don't have to program our cooling, where some systems you do. And what happens there is you either undercool the area where you're not getting an endpoint, or you're overcooling the area where you don't get an endpoint, or you're undercooling the area where you can create like a light guide burn or a mild epidermal burn. So you never have to think about that. It is based on the filter you put in. So what I mean by that is when you put a superficial wavelength in, a superficial filter. So our most superficial is 415 nanometers and 530 nanometers. Those are the most superficial. So would you want a lot of cooling or a little bit of cooling if you're trying to treat superficial hyperpigmentation? You would want just a very small amount of cooling. Why? Because you're trying to heat the epidermis and it's trying to chill the epidermis, and it would just be going against you. So it would take forever to even get to your endpoint. Where a hair follicle is very deep in the tissue. So it's okay to have a ton of cooling with our longer wavelengths, the 630 nanometer, the 755 nanometer. Those are our longest wavelengths. So it's okay to have a lot of cooling on the epidermis to keep them comfortable, because their heat is going very deep at the root of the hair follicle. So you never have to think about it, you just pop it in. The 415 nanometer filter chills to about 18 degrees Celsius. So when you touch it, it's cool, but not overly cold. And then our hair removal filters chill all the way to 5 degrees Celsius. So when you pop in the 630 and the 75, for example, the longest ones, there's condensation on them, they're very frosty, they're very cold to the touch, and that's the reason for it. Keep them comfortable, but it doesn't matter because the heat's going deep. When you're working superficial, we don't have an option. We just have very little cooling so we can make sure to heat where we're trying to work. You never have to think about it. Okay, so now we'll talk about Fitzpatrick. I think after this, we take a quick break. Yep, we do. Okay, so the Fitzpatrick. I like to use actresses as kind of a visual. Hopefully you'll know these actresses as I'm saying them, especially if you're overseas. Okay, so as skin type 1, think of like Nicole Kidman. Very fair skin, doesn't tan, will just burn if she gets in the sun. Light eyes typically. And they are the absolute safest of using lasers and IPL on, because there's hardly any melanin, and their melanocytes produce hardly any melanin. So really the handpiece just wants to be focused on anything that's dark or any type of chromophore in the area. Skin type 2, myself, also Kate Hudson, for example. Light eyes typically, I can get a tan, but I have to be very careful when I'm doing it. So, you know, if I went to Cancun all day with no sunscreen, I'm gonna end up with a burn for sure. Skin type 3, think of like Sandra Bullock, more of that Mediterranean olive skin tone a lot of times. Typically darker eyes, darker hair. They are still safe for a single pulse, but you know, of course, just not as safe as a skin type 1. Okay, skin type 4, I want you to think of any Asian skin type. Even if they walk in and they look as fair as myself, still treat them as a skin type 4, because it's not that they're fair, it's just a lot of times they're avoiding the sun. So if they were in the sun, they could typically get a much better tan than myself. So they're just tricky. Also, they respond very different to really any treatments that you're doing that's heat-based. So just be very safe with any Asian skin type and treat them as a skin type 4. Sometimes they fall into skin type 3, but you'll know that as you're working on them and staying safe, starting with a skin type 4. Also think Hispanic skin. Think, you know, Mexico, South America, most of the time are falling into that skin type 4 category. Someone like Jennifer Lopez. And then skin type 5, I want you to think of like Indian skin. When I went to India, almost everybody was a skin type 5. Now, I'm not going to say everyone was, but almost everybody was. Also, if someone is mixed with African, so if they're Caucasian and African mix, that can be a skin type 5 a lot of times, or Asian and African mix, that can be a skin type 5. And then in skin type 6, I want you to think of African skin. Now, there's a big difference in, like, they could be a skin type 6 and someone could be much darker and someone much lighter, but still falling into that skin type 6 zone. So I don't want, if they're African, don't look at them and go, but they're more fair. Even though they're African, they're more fair. I'm going to treat them as a skin type 5. I would be very safe and just treat them as a skin type 6 always, just to start, because there's no harm in starting safe. But the big thing I want to talk about here is to never guess somebody's skin type. I would highly recommend, so you're never going to treat anybody without a consent form, right? Just because it's medical malpractice. You could create burns on them and be sued. They could have a pacemaker and you didn't know it, and you could create their pacemaker to malfunction, and now that's a huge medical issue. So of course, we're never, or they could have active cancer, skin cancer. So we'll never treat anybody without a consent form, but I would also never treat anybody without a Fitzpatrick quiz. If you're in the States, we have a Viora Fitzpatrick quiz that is on the customer portal. So you could just pull ours if you'd like. If you're not in the States, then just use Google. You can Google Fitzpatrick Skin Quiz and a bunch will pop up and you can pick the one you like. What I recommend is picking one that asks their natural hair color, eye color, and how their skin naturally responds in the sun. And they take that quiz, add it up, and then you can see their proper skin type. If it's way off, if you're looking at me going, oh, she's fair, and I scored myself as like a 5, well then of course they're not doing that quiz right. So you can sit down with them. And what I like to do is, let's say they gave themselves a really high score, how does their skin respond in the sun? And they say they tan really well and they never burn. Well, they're probably just using precaution when they go in the sun, using sunscreen. So I ask them, if you did go to, let's say, Cancun or Mexico all day with no sunscreen on, would you burn? And then they think about it and go, oh, well, yes. So if the quiz is way off, just sit down with them and do it with them. What was I going to say after that? So yeah, so you can just Google, get a Fitzpatrick skin quiz. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The reason why we never want to guess, just look at somebody and guess, is you could look at me. I've already told you I was a skin type 2, so let's pretend like I didn't tell you that. You could look at me and say, she's fair. I think she's a skin type 2. She also has light eyes. I think she's a skin type 2. But you didn't know my dad's from Greece, my mom's from Italy, and it's just the middle of winter and I haven't been in the sun. But if it was summer and I had had some sun exposure, now I'm really nice and tan. So that's why you never want to guess. You could look at someone and say, oh, she's fair, but just not realize those things. So that's why the Fitzpatrick quiz is so important to have. And you would do that along with your consent form. Okay, so now we are going to take a 10-minute break. So it is 9:51 a.m. my time, and that's California time. So just 10 minutes from now, we'll come back. Now, don't log off because it's just hard to then log back on, and we'd also have to mute everybody again. So just stay on. No one can see you anyways. And take your 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. And when we come back, we're going to go through all the different things that we can treat: hair removal, acne, pigment, what kinds of pigment we're treating. So that will be the second half of the workbook. Okay, so sorry, now it's 9:52 a.m. my time. So I'll be coming back at 10:02 a.m. my time, so just 2 minutes after whatever hour you are at. All right, we'll see you in just a bit. Okay, we will get started again. Let me just make sure I mute everyone just in case anybody popped on. All right. Okay, now we'll go into hair removal. So with hair removal, we have 3 filters, and we spoke about a little bit about why, so we'll go into kind of a review on that. So we have a 755 nanometer, a 630 nanometer, and a 570 nanometer. Sorry, I haven't drank water. I'm talking for 4 hours. I need to keep up with my water intake. Okay, so we have 3 different filters for 2 different reasons. One, what skin type are they? So just remember, the longer the wavelength, the deeper it goes, therefore the safer it is for dark skin. Why? Because their melanocytes are superficial. They're right at the bottom of the epidermis, and that's what produces the pigment of our skin. So if we focus the heat deeper and more so wanting to bypass that epidermal hyperpigmentation, then, or I should say just overall pigment, then we're safer on darker skin. And then the second reason is, where are the hair follicles that we're treating? So again, for example, a bikini area for hair removal, those hair follicles are going to grow much deeper compared to above the lip. So women that have hair above the lip, not men, but women that have hair above the lip, those are a lot more superficial. Women that have dark hair on the overall face, that is more superficial. Now, when it comes to hormonal hair that women get, typically here on the chin area, those are much coarser, denser hair follicles, not always dense, but definitely coarser. Then you would use a deeper filter. Just like a man's beard or neck, if he's sick of shaving it and wants to do hair removal, then it's best to do a longer wavelength. Now, if they're lighter skin type 1 through really 4, you would want to use the 630 for deeper hair follicles. If they're darker than that, your skin type 5s and 6s, it's going to be a lot safer to use the 755. Now, if you've owned your IPL handpiece for a couple of years now and you're just now hearing about the 755, we just added it this last year, and you can absolutely purchase it. Why would you need it? If you had a lot more of the darker skin clientele, that's when it would be in need. So if you do have your skin type 5s and 6s, then I would recommend getting it on myviora.com. If you guys are overseas, well, if you're overseas from like India or maybe even Dubai, some of the other Asian countries, then the 755 is going to be a huge asset to you guys. Okay. So that's why we have the 3 filters for those 2 different reasons. Now we'll talk about this photo right down here. What are we actually doing to the hair follicle? What is the science behind it? So going back to that photothermolysis, right? Light, heat, and then destruction. So we're building up heat with light, we're building up heat in the hair follicle. We're going to the root of the hair follicle, which is the living cells, the papilla. So we heat the root of the hair follicle to get coagulation and necrosis. And what that does is it compromises the stem cell. So when we compromise the stem cell, then the stem cell has no really pigment to produce. And that's when the hair follicles, by the way, it's permanent hair reduction, not permanent hair removal. So it's the reduction of it, not really completely destroying that hair follicle. So we're taking those hairs back to the pre-hormonal state, which are vellus hairs. So it looks like we did permanent hair removal because it's just, you know, peach fuzz is another name for vellus hair. But the root of the hair follicle is still there. It's still there, but it's not really active. So the stem cell is not active producing the pigment. The only thing that's permanent hair removal would be electrolysis. And that's just not popular nowadays because it's painful, it takes forever, they have to destroy every single little hair follicle. So that's why laser hair removal and IPL hair removal are so popular now, because we can do, you know, all the hairs within 30 minutes or even 15 minutes if it's a small area. Okay, so that's what we do to the hair follicle. Now, and actually this page walks through that as well. So now we'll look at this chart right here at the top of the page. So this is the hair growth chart. So we have anagen, catagen, and telogen. The only time we're treating is, or wanting to treat, is during the anagen phase. Why? Because that's when the hair follicle is actually intact to the stem cell. So we actually have a target. When it reaches catagen and telogen, this is when the hair follicle will come apart from the living cells and actually shed. So that's when we don't have a target. But you can't look at somebody's legs and say, that hair follicle is an anagen, that hair follicle's not. You don't know. So you would just do the treatment, of course, and then it's how you space it out from there. So the face, it would be about every 4 weeks for most of those hair follicles to come back to the anagen phase. Then the chin, think of like hormonal areas, the chin, the underarms, the bikini area, between every 4 to 6 weeks. It is more optimal to push it out a bit longer in those areas to 6 weeks. And studies have showed that the 6-week mark is going to be the best. And then back, legs, and arms, you can treat between every 8 and 10 weeks, but more so I would push towards the 8 weeks. Again, studies have shown that most of those anagen hairs are back to their, most of those hairs are back to the anagen phase, and we'll get a large bulk of anagen hair follicles at 8 weeks. So chin, like hormonal hair, underarms, bikini, 6 weeks, back, legs, and arms, 8 weeks. And then the face, like, dark hair on the face, above the lip, that can be done once a month. Then this photo shows the depth of hair follicles. So it's just kind of a reminder of which filters to choose. You can see upper lip is going to be the most superficial, where pubic hair is going to be the deepest, which we've been talking about. But like a man's back, a man's beard, woman's legs, those are deeper growing follicles as well. All right. So now we're going to stay on this page just for a bit. I'm actually going to see, can I zoom in here? It's so weird. I used to be able to zoom a couple weeks ago, and now I'm no longer able to zoom. So sorry, you guys. Okay, so we're going to focus on this photo right down here, which is the endpoint. So with IPL and lasers, if you guys are used to working with lasers and maybe just learning IPL, we are always working towards an endpoint. So if you guys were on 2 days ago on Tuesday with radio frequency is a bit easier because it's already planned out for you. We already did all of the research and R&D, and we know that at a certain temperature and holding a certain temperature for a certain amount of time will give you the biological response that you're wanting. So with RF, for example, when we get to 39 to 42 degrees and we hold that for 10 minutes in our fat layer, we're able to stimulate lipolysis. So there's not really much thinking that goes along with that. With IPL and laser, it's different. It's based on us as operators. And that's why IPL is so important to really know what you're doing for, one, safety, but also efficacy, because it's based on us to get them efficacious treatments on what we're seeing, which is the endpoint. So for hair removal, the endpoint is called perifollicular erythema and edema. So that means there's redness and swelling around each of the hair follicles. You can see there's just little red dots. It looks like the hair follicles are just really angry, because they are. However, we don't always get this perfect endpoint on everyone, or we get it, but they see it an hour later when they're home. You didn't see it. Or they have very dark skin type 6, they may have it, it's just really hard to see. So there's a couple other endpoints that you can go for with hair removal. Just overall erythema and edema, and for them to feel a mild sunburn sensation. That is important with anything that you're treating, is that lingering, very mild sunburn sensation and redness and swelling in the tissue. Also, a big one is the smell of burnt hair. So if you're treating an area like a woman's legs, or really a coarse, dense bikini hair, that's going to be very easy to get the smell of burnt hair. The big thing is shaving. So we always want to make sure the patients shave the day before. The reason being is if they shave the day of, they can have some razor irritation, razor burn, and then we're putting high heat on that, and that's not going to be good for them. If they forget and they're like, oh shoot, I didn't shave yesterday, and you're needing to shave them that day, that's not the end of the world. It's fine. You just have to be very careful and not creating razor burn. If they said, oh shoot, I forgot to shave a couple days ago, and they come in, and you can actually look at the hair at that time and see how long is it? how much of the hair is coming out of the actual skin. If it's just barely anything and it's stubbly, that's okay. If hairs are really coming out where you can see them well, this is going to be an issue. The reason being is when you do the treatment, you're going to get the smell of burnt hair because what's burning is the hair follicles that are outside of the skin. The problem with that is it's going to be very uncomfortable for them because those hairs singe and they affect the skin then, so it's uncomfortable. But moreover, the heat is not going to actually get down to the root of the hair follicle because the hair that's coming out of the skin is absorbing all the heat. So it's not going to be efficacious at all. So just make sure that, you know, it's that you really talk to them in a consultation and they know the importance of shaving the day before and the reasons why. Okay, so smell of burnt hair is a huge positive when the hair follicles are not coming out of the skin. It's an indication of knowing that you're getting to your endpoint. Now, it's going to be a bit confusing when you first start with the IPL because you have questions on, well, what do I do to get to my endpoint? Do I turn up my energy or do I shorten my pulse duration? So I figured out a way of teaching, and also now I do this myself while doing treatments, an easy way of adjusting and not having to like jump up a joule, then down a millisecond, then up a joule, and then up a joule, and down a millisecond. It's confusing. So this is what I do. Let's say that we're treating an underarm. And I'm going to talk about how we test and how we get to that perfect endpoint. And by the way, always add 15 minutes on to everybody's first treatment because you need the time to slowly test to get to that perfect endpoint without creating any burns. And it could take 5 to 10 minutes, but just give yourself 15 minutes just in case. Once you find the perfect endpoint by adjusting your joules and your parameters, then you would chart that. Charting is so important. You would chart what you did. When they come back in for their second treatment, there's not much you need to adjust. Plus, you only have to typically do one pass because you took the time to find the perfect parameter of what their tissue and hair responds to. Okay, so first you're going to set your parameters based on what are you seeing. So it will default the joules for you, so that's great. You put them as a skin type, let's say 3, and it defaults to 14 joules. That is the joule you'll start with, so that's nice and easy. But you do need to select your pulse duration. And then also always remember you need to select your pulse configuration as well based on the skin type that they are. But you always do have to select their pulse duration. So they're a skin type 3, so we put them on a single pulse. And now we have an option, let's just say, I'm making up numbers. Let's say we have an option between 10 milliseconds and 50 milliseconds. Now, let's say that the underarms, the hair is medium color and medium thickness. What pulse duration would you choose? And by the way, in a consultation, make sure you take a peek at their hair because if they shaved the day before, you may not be able to see it. Okay, so between 10 and 50 milliseconds, if it's medium thickness, medium hair color, what would you choose? Would you choose closer to 10 milliseconds or would you choose closer to 50 milliseconds? I would choose right in the middle because I said medium, right? Medium color, medium thickness. If I would have said dark, coarse, dense, I would for sure be at 50 milliseconds for testing. If I said very fine, light hairs, I would be much closer to 10 milliseconds, like 20 or 15 to test. Never test on 10 milliseconds, so it's too aggressive. So I said medium. So let's say we set it on 30 milliseconds, right? We're right there in the middle, or 25 milliseconds, right there in the middle. So you're gonna test in 3 spots. So not like 1, 2, 3, right next to each other, 10% overlap. The reason why we do 3 is if I just did 1 pulse, it's going to be very hard for me to see, like assess the skin, but it's also going to be very hard for them to tell me what their lingering sensation is because it's a very small area. So that's why we do 3, get a larger area to assess for them to feel and for you to see, but it also gives a better idea of what the build on heat is going to be. If you just did 1 pulse and you got the right parameter and it responded well, great, and then you go to do the full area, maybe it was too much because now that build on heat is really building heat, so maybe it's too much. Where 3 pulses is going to give you more of an accurate reading on what a build on heat would be like. So 1, 2, 3. Always using ultrasound gel with the IPL, always using clear ultrasound gel. That's very important. You never want to order blue or green. It can be cheaper, but there's dye in it. So that's going to affect your wavelengths that you're wanting to use in the skin. So always clear. a really thin layer for your lighter skin types. You can thicken it up for your darker skin types for extra protection of their epidermis, which I always do as well. So we're a skin type 3, so I put a thin layer of ultrasound gel, then I take a tongue depressor and I wipe it off so I can see the skin, see what the response is, but also so they can give me a feedback on what their lingering sensation is. If the gel's on there and it's cool, all they're gonna say is, all I feel is the cold gel. So make sure you wipe off the gel where you tested. Then you're gonna wait a minute to 2 minutes before you ask them. Don't ask them, how was that right after the pulse? Because all they're going to tell you is what the actual pulse felt like. And that's just based on their pain tolerance. What you want to know as the operator in getting to your endpoint is, what is the lingering sensation? Is there no lingering sensation? Is there a mild, like, tingling sensation? Is there a sensation of like you just slapped them? Is there a sensation of heat? So that's what we want to know. So I wipe off the gel. Let's say I had no redness at all when I tested, like nothing happened. Wipe off the gel. I ask them a minute later, what is your lingering sensation? And they say, nothing. Okay. If you, and I would take notes here if you can. This is going to be recorded, so you can always come back and take notes later. But if you have a pen and a piece of paper, I just recommend having it, these notes. If you have no redness at all, you could go up by 2 joules. So 0 redness, 2 joules. So what I do is I first focus on my energy. I don't adjust the pulse duration right away. I set it to what it probably should be, and then I just work the energy. Why I do that, I simplified it. What I want to know is, what energy does it take for their tissue to respond? Maybe you selected the perfect pulse duration when you first started, but the first thing is, what energy does their actual tissue respond to? I can be a skin type 2 and someone else can be a skin type 2, and I may take 16 joules of energy to respond and they may only take 10 joules of energy to respond. You just never know. So you first work the energy. So 0 redness, go up by 2 joules. So now, what did I say the default was? Let's just say the default was 10 joules to make it easy. So I tested at 10 joules. Now I go up 2, I'm at 12 joules. I pick a different area. I don't want to test over and over on the same spot, because that's not going to show me my actual perfect parameter that I want to get to. So I pick a different area, 1, 2, 3, right next to one another, wipe off the gel, wait a minute or 2, ask them, do you have any lingering sensation? Let's say I saw some mild pinkness to the skin, but it faded really fast. And then I ask them a minute later, what kind of lingering sensation do you have right now? And they say, I felt a little bit of like tingling, but now it's gone. Okay, you're still not there, because remember, we want redness that lasts, doesn't fade, and for mild heat that lasts and doesn't fade for them. So, but I did have some pinkness to the tissue. So now I don't want to jump 2 joules. Now I only go up by 1. So once you get redness, then you'll only adjust by 1. Okay, so I was at 12 joules. Now I go to 13. Pick another area. 1, 2, 3, wipe off the gel, same thing. Now let's say that, okay, the pinkness is lasting, it's not fading, and I ask them, what is your sensation? And they say, it's like a stronger tingling sensation that's not going away. Is there any heat with it? That's what you always want to ask. And they say, no, you're still not there. So if you run out of areas here, come over here. So 1, 2, 3, you went up 1 joule, sorry, so now you're at 14. 1, 2, 3, wipe off the gel. Okay, now the pinkness is really looking much better. It's not fading. You ask them, is there any mild heat now? A minute later, and they say, yeah, just a little bit, like barely. I can barely feel it, but just a little bit. Okay, now you start to, you find your most likely your joule that really has affected the tissue. You know what energy level that they need for them to actually hold on to some heat. But now you start to look at the hair follicles. Are they changing? Are there little red dots like here that you're seeing? Are they swollen at all? If you don't have any of that, you still don't smell burnt hair. Okay, so now this is when you start to drop your pulse duration. So you found the energy you need. Now we got to adjust that to make sure we really target the hair properly. So let's say we're at 25 joules. Now I'm sorry, 25 milliseconds. Now I go down to 20. I test in another area, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now it's even more red. Ask a minute or 2 later, any lingering sensation? They say, yeah, there's stronger heat. Okay, this is when I always use a number system, because I want to know how strong that heat is. Is it too much? Oh, and let's say we got the smell of burnt hair. So yay, okay, we got the smell of burnt hair, the redness is lasting, everything looks great, but then I have to wait a minute or two for them. And I use that number system, 0 through 10. How much heat are you feeling? If they say, well, maybe like a 3, okay, good. I usually wait a minute or two before I proceed. And then I ask them again, is that heat staying or increasing or decreasing? When they say it's increasing, that's when I really hold off and I wait a bit. If they say it is staying the same or kind of going away, awesome. This is where you need to be, and this is where you found your parameter. You would chart that. You would chart that it was 14 joules and 20 milliseconds. So then the next time they come in, that is probably their perfect parameter again. Test it, great. You got the same endpoint result. Then you just do the underarms, one pass. Typically, you can go over it the second time if you need to, and they're out the door. So 15-minute treatment now, because you took the extra 15 minutes before their treatment to really find their perfect parameter. Let's say you tested and you didn't get that same response because the hair follicles are much finer and lighter, not as dense anymore. Then all you have to do is adjust one of two things. Either go up in your joule and test, or decrease your millisecond and test. I usually decrease my millisecond. So now I'm at 15 milliseconds. Got your endpoint, great. Then the treatment's quick and easy again. So that's what I recommend, is just always adding that 15 minutes on to everybody's first treatment. I'm going to stop for a second just to see what questions we have. Okay, with IPL, since you can't tan, I got a couple questions, sorry. With IPL, since you can't tan, can't really do treatments during the summer with leg hair removal since most people are out in the sun, lake schools, etc., right? Yes, correct. So if people are in the sun, and I always say this too, your IPL revenue, your ROI in general, return on investment, will decrease with the IPL and laser systems you have in the spring and summer, typically, because that's when they're in the sun, they're tan, and we cannot treat over tan skin. You're correct on that, because the melanocytes are active. So that's the worst time to treat, is when the melanocytes are active and they're really wanting to absorb that light. So that's when you can create burns. So absolutely. Your RF, however, is your big money maker in spring and summer usually, because you know your RF handpieces, like your V form, treats cellulite and contouring, and the ST is colorblind, so you can treat the skin if they're going to possibly be in the sun. So you're still making revenue with your RF in the spring and summer, but then you'll notice in the fall and winter that your IPL and laser systems really increase in revenue, because now they're able to get hair removal. Now they're able to remove the sun damage that they just, created that summer. So yes, you are correct about that. Hi, is easy plucking of hair soon after treatment is important endpoint? Wait, is easy plucking off hair soon after treatment is important endpoint? Okay, so their question was, if they, and I'm actually glad you said that, because that just reminded me of something. Make sure that your patients are never tweezing or waxing before their treatment, because then there's no target at all. They were asking, if you tweeze a hair after and it easily slides out, is that a good endpoint? Sure, but they don't have to. I always tell them, if it's the underarm and they're using deodorant a couple weeks later, they'll notice when they look at their deodorant, there's little hair follicles that are on their actual deodorant, and it's because you've destroyed them and they just are falling out. So it's not a necessary thing of tweezing them, but if they're easily coming out that way, it is a good endpoint for them to see. Okay, regarding the facial hair reduction, we all know that with shaving, the hair is going to be more coarse and stronger. What is the recommended strategy to deal with fair facial hair without strengthening the hair follicles on the face? That is a myth. Well, I may be reading that wrong, that I'm more so thinking like shaving the facial hair, let's say, it's not going to create those hair follicles to become like coarse and darker than they already are. That's a myth. However, you might be asking, when you shave them, that they become very like kind of prickly as they grow back. So that is the case. Like if you shave something, that when it starts to grow back, it's prickly. Like if you let your leg hair grow out, then it's soft. But when you shave it the next couple days, it's more prickly feeling and stubbly feeling because it's shorter. So that is the case, sure. But remember, you're getting to your endpoint. So when they're growing back, those hair follicles, they're going to be much finer, more like vellus hair anyways. But it is important. They have to do it. If the hair follicles are too long, it's not going to get to the root of the hair follicles, so you're not going to be able to give them a treatment. So it's just, it kind of is what it is. You know, they just have to kind of have maybe a few of that feel of stubbly hairs for a few days. That won't last long though. I mean, you're treating them once a month, so you'll really be able to get rid of that hair quickly. Okay, it's myth, right, that shaving will make them grow faster, right? Yeah, all of that's a myth, that it makes it grow faster or coarser or darker or denser. That's all a myth. But I think your other side of your question is correct. It will feel stubbly as it grows out because it's short, so it does feel stubbly. When hair follicles get long, then they become softer. So kind of just something that they have to go through. All right, it's myth, right, that shaving will make them... Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so good. I'm glad we did that chat on hair. Oh, we got one more. This is kind of nice doing questions after each section. How should we proceed with tan skin? Don't treat. You just can't treat. If they have actively been in the sun, you have to wait 4 weeks for safety. So, you know, if they don't plan on and here's another thing, you have to wait 4 weeks for safety, but then they cannot get in the sun after at all, because it can really easily create burns on their skin and damage skin if it's sensitive to the sun. So it's like using retinol, right? If they're using high retinol and they get in the sun, that's an issue. So really, they just need to make sure if they sign up for hair removal treatments that they are going to avoid the sun within those months. So that's why it's usually easier to do it spring and winter. Now I understand, did I say that right? No, I did not. Winter and fall. Now I understand that some of you guys are overseas, so some of you guys don't really have a fall and winter, right? It's always sunny. So then they just have to know, okay, I'm getting these treatments, I need to avoid the sun, using high SPF, not, you know, laying out in it, being very safe. Will any of this webinar deal with IPL for dry eye treatments? It's so funny. I heard that recently, that there was something that came out about dry eyes and treatment with the IPL. And we looked into it and we did not find any like true clinical data that could prove that. And I don't see how it could. And I'm not sure if you're talking about like literally the eyeballs being dry or surrounding tissue to be dry, because obviously we can never put it into the eyeball. We're protecting the eyes, right, to not create any damage to the eyes. But surrounding tissue, it can help because it works with water. Another handpiece that can help with overall dryness around the eyes is the VFR, if you do have that handpiece, where it can help replenish hydrogen bonds. But the IPL can help rejuvenate the tissue and all of those cells as well. We'll be discussing skin rejuvenation with IPL. Yes. IPL versus diode laser. Okay, so we actually, I'm glad you asked that. We have a brand new diode laser. It's called the Dio Breeze. So super exciting. And the reason why we brought on a diode laser, because we have an IPL that treats hair removal really well. But the reason why we brought on a diode laser is for our offices needing it because they have a ton of clients for hair removal. So it's just, you know, they're doing hair removal constantly. And the diode can sometimes be faster treatments. Now, there's not a big difference in efficacy because the IPL is so good for hair removal. Really, this is what I always say. The big thing is, do you build heat? Do you get an endpoint? Do you see hair reduction? Do you smell burnt hair? Do you have perifollicular erythema and edema when you're using diode or IPL? If you do, then you're getting to your endpoint. Therefore, you're going to get reduction of hair follicles. But the diode is known to be the best wavelength to target hair removal. So there's also huge positives to just having a diode. It's quicker, it's the perfect wavelength for hair removal. You know it's gonna, work quickly. So if you're wanting to do a ton of hair removal clients, then the Diode Breeze, we always say, would be really worth having. So, there's kind of pros and cons, I think, to both. What about combination of different filters in one procedure? Presence of superficial and deep vessels and age spots. We will talk about that. I'm glad you asked that, and we will talk about combining different filters. I'm an ophthalmologist, and the IPL is being recommended now for treatment of the, I know I keep hearing this. Okay, so let me keep reading. Of the oil glands in the lid, which is an aspect of dry eye disease. Okay, thank you so much. Probably want the small handpiece up to the lid margin. Glands are in the upper and lower lids. Wow, I'm so glad you wrote in. Thank you so much. I'm going to read more about this. I'm constantly doing these webinars, and we're also, by the way, we're going to be on Instagram today at 6 p.m. Eastern, and it's called Cocktails with Kara. And I'm going to take any and all questions on all of our hand pieces, so you guys can write in, and we'll go through all of that while having cocktails. So anyways, I'll keep reading about this. So other webinars, other Instagram lives, I can give a bit more information when I talk to other doctors on what the parameters would be. But thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm actually going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photo of this so I don't forget everything you said, Susan. There we go. Sorry, I had to get it just right. People are writing questions. Okay. Do you have any experience in the treatment? Let me scroll down. The treatment of atopic dermatitis, sensitive skin. Actually, it's, unless you know that like another study that came out, like the dry eyes, that IPL would be a benefit. For example, like psoriasis. Psoriasis, UV light, it can be very good for psoriasis. However, our filters block out UV, so it's not going to be a benefit to them. And we block out UV for safety for all other treatments. Dermatitis and sensitive skin, that's actually going to be a contraindication, and it always has been. If you know of something that has changed within studies, I'm more than welcome to hear about that if you want to write in. And again, I can go in and study more about it, and then we can come up with a protocol for it. So it's always great. We always learn from you guys as well. How can we deal with customers who use tanning remedies? For example, a client with skin type 2 and dark hair applies tanning sprays. Which parameters should you go for? Oh, spray tanning, we can't go over as well because it can create a burn, unfortunately. So if they spray tan, I do as well. I spray tan a lot. So when I want to get treatments done, I'm like, oh shoot, I need to stop. So a week after, usually the spray tan has exfoliated off the skin a week later. If they come in and you can kind of see a little residual spray tan, just take alcohol and gauze and wipe the area. Alcohol usually removes the spray tan really well, but you have to be very careful. They need to know, don't spray tan a week before your treatments. I will try and send you info from our peer review literature. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Susan. Wow, I really, really appreciate you. This is so exciting. So Susan, my email is Kara, K-A-R-A .Moncrief, M as in Mary, O, N as in Nancy, C-R-I-E-F as in Frank, at vioramed.com. So you can send it directly there. By the way, if you guys have any additional clinical questions, you won't use that email because I travel so much. I'm not traveling right now, of course, but once things normalize, soon, hopefully, I will be on the road a lot. So if you email me directly, then it may take a while for me to get back to you, and I don't want that to happen. So any real clinical questions after this, you'll email clinical.usa. Oh, sorry, that's not right. No dot. clinicalusa@vioramed.com. And if you guys are from overseas, then you won't use that email. You'll email directly to your distributor. But thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate you. Okay, now we'll move on. All right, treatment course. Typically, it's about 6 to 10 treatments. Now, 10 is a lot. I would say somebody with really dark, dense, coarse hair is really the only time you're ever needing up to 10. A lot of times you can even do it in 6 and they get great results. But if you're looking at it and you're like, oof, that's dense and coarse, it's better to sell too many than too little. And they can always use other ones, like leftover ones. If you've got to your endpoint at 8 and they have 2 left over because they bought 10, then they can save them for maintenance treatments. Or you can say, hey, let's take 1 and now treat your pigment. And you do it and they love it and they're like, oh my gosh, I love this, and they buy another package. So rolling them over into another treatment. Typically it's 6 treatments though that they get really great results. Hormonal hair is gonna be hard. You know, if they have like hormonal chin hair, if they're not seeing an endocrinologist and they're not getting their hormones actually checked or balanced, then it doesn't mean that you do 6 treatments and those hair follicles will be gone if they still have hormonal issues systemically. So that's another thing I like to say, talk to your clients about is, okay, we have obvious signs of hormones going, you know, hormone imbalance, possible hormone imbalance. We have hormonal chin hair, maybe they have melasma, and recommend for them to see an endocrinologist just to get their hormones checked in general, or their family practice doctor can do even, you know, checks on that. Okay, so interval, 1 treatment every 4 to 10 weeks, depending on that anatomic site that we went through. And then maintenance is required. Sometimes it's 6 months, but not always. Some people don't need maintenance treatments for a year. So with hair removal, I would more so say just have them call when they're needing a maintenance treatment, and hopefully they're in there seeing you more for other things. You know, maybe they're doing body contouring once a week, maybe they're getting skin rejuvenation treatments once a month. So you're still seeing them. So you can look at the area and say, oh, okay, I think it's time for a maintenance session, or they can tell you when they see you. All right, so I'll just look at these 3 questions before I move on to the next topic. Oh, thank you so much, Donna. She wrote in the chat, the email, and then really good presentation. Thank you so much. You're so welcome. Thank you. In skin type 5, where we can't appreciate perifollicular erythema, how to know endpoint in skin type 5? Same, it's for them to feel that very mild sunburn sensation, not too strong. For you to smell the burnt hair, same thing. So a lot of times you don't see the perifollicular. So if that's the case, smell a burnt hair, for them to have a very mild sunburn sensation. Hope that helps. All right, now we'll move on to the next topic. Pigmented lesions. All right, so we have 2 filters for pigmented lesions for 2 different reasons. We have the 530 nanometer and we have the 580 nanometer. So remember, your darker skin types, it's safer for a longer wavelength. So 580 nanometers, if they come in as a skin type 4 and they have sunspots, start with the 580 because it's not going to be as aggressive as the 530. The 530 is the most aggressive when it comes to targeting right where our melanocytes are. We need that though when someone is a lighter skin type and they have solar lentigo. Those are typically very superficial. So the 530, more superficial, targeting right where their melanocytes are. So remembering their skin type to always start. If you need to move to the more aggressive one, that's okay, but you started with the safer one until you got to know their skin. Then you can get more aggressive as you go because you already have their previous parameters charted. You know how they are responding to the treatments because you're seeing them every month. So just note that. And then additionally, how deep is the pigment? Is it superficial or is it dense, something dense where it may have dermal components? So we'll talk about that in just a bit. So let me take a sip of water, sorry. I also live in the desert, so it's so dry here, which is good for my skin though. I know that sounds crazy because I'm very oily. So when I go to Florida, it's not a pretty sight. Okay, so what are we treating? We're treating the overabundant amount of pigment, which is called hyperpigmentation. And what we're doing, so if you look at yourself and you see any type of, let's just say, sunspot on you. I have one on my hand, a little sunspot here. Will that go away naturally if I'm not using any type of lotions or potions or lasers or IPL? Would it just fade away? No. When you have solar lentigo, it's just not going to fade away on your face. It's going to be there, sunspots. So how are we getting rid of it with the IPL? Well, that spot on my hand, you may not be able to see it, but that spot on my hand is too big for my body to naturally break it down. So what we're doing with the IPL is, again, going back to that photothermolysis, where we take light, we build up heat, and when we build up enough heat, we get destruction. What it's doing to the pigment is we build up enough heat to where it shatters, and it shatters to teeny tiny little particles. And you can actually see this during the healing process. It starts to look like little coffee grounds. Why? It's going through the process of phagocytosis, meaning we break it up, we shatter it into tiny particles. Now it's small enough for our body to naturally get rid of it. Now it's debris to the body. So it goes through this process of phagocytosis where our white blood cells, or they're called Pac-Man cells, come and engulf the debris and take it away. So when it starts to look like little coffee grounds or little like pepper flakes, that's so important for your patients not to pick at it, because I tell them it's like picking at a scab. What could happen? They could scar. So when you pick at those little spots, you're removing it where the body should be removing it naturally. So let the body do its job, and it will go through that full process. So that's what we're doing to the actual pigment. Now, there's two types of skin disorders. We can either have hypopigmentation or hyperpigmentation. So I'm going to stay on this just for a bit, the hypopigmentation. This is a picture of someone that actually has vitiligo, which is a contraindication. We can't treat them, but it's just a nice photo of showing what hypopigmentation is. Now, I have hypopigmentation. Actually, I have it on my chest. You probably can't see it just because this camera isn't great. But really, there's two types of hypopigmentation. There's transient hypopigmentation and non-transient hypopigmentation. My white hypopigmented spots are non-transient. Those are stuck with me for the rest of my life, unless they found something that could really bring back the melanocytes in the area, which I haven't heard anything that works yet. And the reason why they're not transient and they're there forever is because I've damaged them with sun. So in my younger years, so we can damage our melanocytes with the sun, and they could either hyperpigment, where we have this and this solar lentigo, or it can hypopigment, where those melanocytes have just given up on life. They're not producing pigment and they're not going to. So that's non-transient. Now, there is transient hypopigmentation. So I want to talk about if you accidentally burn somebody, because it's not fun. I want to reassure you, though, that almost everybody has done it once. So don't think it's the end of the world if you accidentally do it. So if you, oh, by the way, so there's a difference between a light guide burn and a mild epidermal burn. Let me just grab the handpiece and explain that. Just making sure it doesn't fall off the counter. It's being a mess. Okay, so a mild epidermal burn is if you, let me go back. A light guide burn. Actually, no. Let me put this down for a second. A mild epidermal burn is just, you know what? I actually have a picture of it in the workbook. I wish I could zoom in. So this is what a mild epidermal burn looks like. And it could be a bit more aggressive than that even, but you can see it's not solid rectangles. And you can see though that the pigmented spots darkened, but you also kind of targeted the surrounding tissue a bit. That is not the end of the world by no means. Actually, they'll probably get a really nice result, but you're not wanting to go towards that, because 1 or 2 joules higher than this would create a light guide burn. So a light guide burn is different than a mild epidermal burn. A light guide burn, looks like you put this on a flame, on a fire, and then branded it. Fell. Shoot. It looks like you put this on a flame and then branded them with it. That is an issue. That is a light guide burn, takes a while to heal. So we don't want that to happen, and it can have complications. So if it does happen, the first signs of knowing that it happened is for them to start saying, it's getting really hot. Wherever you treat it, it's getting really hot. So I want you guys to be prepared for that. There's a few things you should always have in your room when you're doing an IPL treatment or nearby. Ice packs, cool packs, or the ability to just get ice in general. I usually, like at Viora academies, and if I've met you guys overseas and we've done events, you probably know I always want to have ice and gloves around me when I'm doing a demo treatment, you know, for a large crowd. And I just want that for safety. So the reason why I like ice and gloves is the glove is usually pretty thick, and it gives a barrier, because the one thing you don't want to do is put ice on a burn. So it gives a barrier. If the gloves that I'm using are a bit thinner, then I'll just wrap it in gauze to give a barrier. You can use cool packs as well. I like ice better because the cool packs really don't get very cold, and they really get warm very quickly. So having ice or cool packs around, very important. Additionally, I love hydrocortisone, and I have hydrocortisone with me usually everywhere I go if I'm going to be doing an IPL treatment. And I actually, even if I don't burn them, which I don't, but even after a normal treatment, I always put hydrocortisone on the area, not for hair removal, not for acne, but for everything else, for a vascular treatment, for a skin rejuvenation treatment, for a pigment treatment, because those are ones that really build heat more in the tissue. I always pop a layer of hydrocortisone because it's a topical steroid, just over the counter, 1%, for safety, because it stops the heat from progressing. And that's what I want. I want to get to the heat that I want for my endpoint, but I don't want to keep it getting, or I don't want it to keep getting warmer. So hydrocortisone will really calm the skin down. So I always just put that on in general. I also always just have them ice after, just for safety. And they just can do it for 10 minutes. And I ask them, how does it feel? And they say, no, it's fine. I don't feel any heat. Okay, now you can go. Now, if you create a burn on somebody, a true light guide burn, you want that hydrocortisone around too, because of the reasons I explained. Another thing that's really important to have, if you are a physician, I would call in a prescription of Silvadene. If you are not a physician, then ask your medical director to call in a prescription of Silvadene. Silvadene is always nice to have in emergencies. And Silvadene is a medical burn cream. So first thing it will do is take that heat away from them. Because if you create a light guide burn, it's very, 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 very hot and uncomfortable. And you don't want them to be in that type of agony. So Silvadene will stop that sensation. Additionally, it will stop a first-degree burn turning into a second-degree burn, and that's what we want. Or potentially not even getting to the first-degree burn issue with Silvadene. So first thing you'll do, have them ice it, get your Silvadene ready, get your hydrocortisone ready, pop on a layer of hydrocortisone, then pop on a layer of Silvadene, and then they keep icing on and off until really the heat is gone. If they no longer feel it because of the Silvadene, at least keep icing on and off for an hour. Now, if you've created a light guide burn that you can see, what are you going to do for them in terms of giving them healing results? So they're always going to need to use a gentle skin cleanser. They can never use like an exfoliant or a loofah on the area, just a gentle skin cleanser with their hand. A good one here in the US, actually, it's sold really everywhere overseas, I think, because I've had to go to a lot of your markets in like India and Thailand and, everywhere. I mean, I haven't been to every country, but a lot of them. And most of them sell Cetaphil. So Cetaphil gentle skin cleanser, really nice. It doesn't suds. You know that it's just going to be very gentle, and they'll cleanse with that. Now, it's going to go through its healing process where it's probably going to crust, and then the crust comes off. And after that, it's pink skin. It's that new pink skin. And then that pink skin is going to do one of two things. It's either going to hypopigment or hyperpigment. Hyperpigment is really not a great scenario because that's PIH, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. And a lot of the darker skin types, especially Asian skin and Hispanic skin, you can even ask them if they have the potential of PIH when you've done this. If they burn themselves with a curling iron, or they burn themselves when they're cooking, do they have any hyperpigmented spots there? And it's a good indication. Or like when they break out, are they left with hyperpigmented spots? It's a good indication that they may hyperpigment because they're susceptible to PIH. So then that's a bigger issue. They have to wait 3 to 4 months after, and then you can start treating them for PIH. You can put them on topicals like hydroquinone, vitamin C's, very gently treat them with the IPL, using microneedling with brightening complexes. If you guys are overseas and you have the infusion device, you can use the infusion and microdermabrasion, and then infuse the brightening complex in the area. Now, if they hypopigment, which is what a lot of people do, especially if they're lighter skin, that hypopigmentation, it's scary. It looks scary because there's white rectangles all over them, but it will repigment over time. So this is what they need to do. Gentle skin cleanser, really avoid the sun. Everybody needs to do this. Hats if it's on the face, SPF 50 plus if it's on the face. If it's on the body, SPF 50 and then cover it with clothes for 3 to 4 months because they have to be very safe, 3 to 4 months. After, I would say even 4 months for safety, then they're left with the hypopigmentation. They can get in the sun at this point, and it's good too, because we need to reactivate those melanocytes for them to start producing a bit more pigment. So, just getting them activated. My mom actually had a light guide burn once, and she was going to Florida 5 months after it happened. And I told her, still wear a light sunscreen, but, get a little bit of that sun exposure. It repigmented, and you can't even tell anything's happened now. But, they still have to be safe with that. Don't go bake in the sun after. Just, get out, do a little yard work, walk the dog, still wear a light SPF, and it will repigment. So I just wanted you guys to be prepared for if you accidentally created a burn, or if you do in the future. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. Usually 98% of the time they're fine. Some people get the PIH, which is harder, but you can still treat that. To not be too afraid. I know, but it doesn't feel good. Like you can't sleep that night when it happens. Okay, so now we'll talk about what we can treat. So hyperpigmentation. First one, probably the most common, which is solar lentigo. And solar lentigo is another name for age spots or sunspots. Usually the 530 filter is used unless they're darker skin. So if they're darker skin type 4, and usually skin type 5 or 6 they don't have solar lentigo. So, but anything darker than a 4 and a 4, start with the 580 filter, because the 580 will still pull some of that pigment. It just won't be so aggressive. Then when you get to the tail end of the treatment and the 580 is like, oh, it's not getting a couple spots, then you can move to the 530 for safety. You know their parameters, you know how they respond. You'll still need to start over testing because this is a more aggressive filter. But you already know how their skin responds to these treatments. If they're a lighter skin type 1, 2, or 3, then just start with the 530. The 530 will get rid of all, if not most. If you get to the tail end of the treatment and you're like, gosh, there's just a couple stubborn spots that I can't get, then do the 580. Maybe they're a little deeper, and the 580, you need that for the depth. Okay. Freckles. Freckles are very hard because freckles are of genetic disposition. So when you treat them, it doesn't mean that they're gone forever. They can easily come back because they're genetics. If they get in the sun, usually they come right back. So just make sure that they know that in a consultation, that this isn't a forever treatment. But same with solar lentigo. If they're out in the sun again and they're not listening to you with wearing sunscreen, then they can get solar lentigo again. But freckles are a bit harder. And sometimes people confuse freckles with solar lentigo because they look somewhat similar, but freckles are typically smaller, more round, where solar lentigo is a little bit larger than freckles and more irregular shaped. Some people have freckles and also solar lentigo. They like their freckles. They don't want to get rid of those, but they want to get rid of the sunspots because you can obviously see that they're very different. You can see that they're sunspots or age spots, so it ages them. So you can take a white piece of gauze and cut out the size of the solar lentigo spots and then just put that on the face, protect the freckles because the white will reflect the light, and just spot treat where those solar lentigo spots are. So freckles, you would use the 530 filter typically to treat. And of course, just like the solar lentigo, if you need the 580 at the end, then you can use that. All right, next one, melasma. Whew, this is a tricky one. So melasma, it's the nickname for it is pregnancy mask. And the reason for that is it is very hormonal. So it's not just with pregnancy. It can be when we get older and our hormones start to change, we can get melasma. It can be years of birth control, and maybe we got off birth control and the hormones go crazy. Also, when we get pregnant, or our hormones change. After pregnancy, the hormones change. So it's hard because it's hormonal, right? Because if we treat it, it doesn't mean it's gone forever because our hormones are systemic. So again, like seeing an endocrinologist is going to be helpful for them. If it's just right after pregnancy, so maybe, you know, when their hormones balance, it will become lighter, but not always. Sometimes they're stuck with it. Also, melasma is tricky because it can backfire with any type of light. So if you just went in and treated that lady with the IPL and you're done, it usually becomes darker. It goes from dark brown to black, or light brown to dark brown, or very small to much larger. So it's not always the case, like it could backfire, but I'm not saying that you can't treat it. So how you're going to treat it. And one more thing, a lot of Asian skin types are very susceptible to melasma. Okay, so I'm not saying you can't treat it, because you can, and you can get great results. What you need to do though is prep the skin before, I can't talk anymore, beforehand. So you're using a topical inhibitor, melanin inhibitor, and they will wear this topical product morning and night for 2 to 4 weeks. If you want to be very safe, 4 weeks. So what are they using? I'm going to give you a few ingredients. So maybe you carry a product line that has this. Or maybe you don't and you want to research a product line. So the ingredients that you're going to look for to buy a really good one. I'm also going to give you some brands I know of that have good ones. If you guys have recommendations of other brands, please write it in the comments so we can all see it and we'll discuss it. Or ingredients that I don't list off. So a few of them are hydroquinone is probably the most common. Then vitamin C, B3, kojic acid, green tea. I think licorice root, but I'm not positive. There's one that starts with an L that I just drew a blank on. Anyways, there's a lot. If you Google melanin inhibitors, there's a huge list. So, you know, make sure you have a good product that has a good percentage of these in them. So some brands. Skin Medica has one called Lytera 2.0. That's a bit of a better price point than Obagi and SkinCeuticals. SkinCeuticals is my favorite though. So Obagi has one called number 3. And also keep in mind, you do not want to put them on a melanin inhibitor topical that also has like a retinol, because Obagi products, they're big on the melanin inhibitors plus the peeling to treat these things. So don't choose one with a retinol or peeling agent, because then it makes the skin too sensitive to have treatments. You just want a melanin inhibitor. And what it's doing is it's inhibiting the melanocytes. So when you go in to treat, it is really calming the melanocytes down so they don't backfire and produce too much pigment. So you can go in and break up that pigment without it doing that. So SkinCeuticals, they have 3, they may even have more at this point, but they have 3, and I can't remember one of the names right now, but they have Color Defense. I can't think of any of them right now. Advanced Pigment Corrector, that's one, Advanced Pigment Corrector. something defense. And then there's another one that's great. The defense one is really good. Let me see the chat and they'll know. Arbutin, that's what I was thinking. It didn't start with an L. Arbutin is one. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Licorice root, they said is one, great. Something acid, I can't even pronounce that. Tranexamic acid. You guys can see the comments though. Tranexamic acid. Lytira contains licorice. Okay, so licorice is one. And then arbutin, great. Oh, and they have a retinol in it, but it's 0.03%, so low. So we haven't had any complications with the Lytira 2.0. Oh, discoloration defense. Thank you so much. So SkinCeuticals, it's discoloration defense. That one, the ingredients in it is phenomenal. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. There's another one from SkinCeuticals. The people that are writing in right now, and maybe you'll know it, that I heard was like their newest and really great. Okay. So, but there's other brands out there, right? I'm just naming 3. So there's other brands out there that could be really great. And, you know, just, you guys have your time right now to do the research, right? We're all at home, we're on lockdown. So you have the time to research these things. And if you don't have a skincare line, probably a good time to start researching it and carrying one. To be able to sell people sunscreen, and a good sunscreen that you know is good, to be able to sell people the melanin inhibitors that they're needing and you know it's a good brand. So definitely something to look into. Wait, discoloration defense, and then Metacell renewal for skin brightening. Awesome, thank you so much. All right, so they'll wear that morning and night, and for, oh, we got another one, hold on. Discoloration defense, advanced pigment corrector. Yep, I said that one. I said the advanced pigment corrector. That, thank you so much. That one is good. I really appreciate it. You must carry this line. Awesome, thanks. It is great. Okay. So they'll wear that morning and night, and they'll stay on it morning and night throughout their whole course of treatment. Then you're able to treat it. Now, melasma can be a mixed dermal and epidermal. A mix of, I should say. So with melasma, because there's density to it, and by the way, melasma is going to be symmetrical. So if there's a patch here above the lip, there's going to be a patch here. If there's a patch here, then there's going to be a patch here. Here, then there's going to be a patch here. So if you're wondering, is it melasma, that's something to look into. But I would start with the 580 with melasma because there's a lot of density, the patches of pigment. So to be safe, because there's so much pigment there, start with the 580, and then you can slowly move to the 530 once you've done a few treatments. Okay, so then we can treat keratosis. Keratosis can often be confused with solar lentigo because it can look the same. But with keratosis, there's a rough kind of, a rougher patch of skin, kind of crusty almost. And the 530 works really well to get rid of the pigment of a keratosis. Now, if they're left with kind of that rough, crusty skin after you've removed the pigment, then you can go in with the 580 to give a skin rejuvenation response to it, which works really well. If you guys have the VFR handpiece, I actually got my first keratosis. It's actually on this side of my forehead, but because of my bangs, I can't move it. It's not even there anymore though. I got my first keratosis here on my forehead on the other side, and I went to the doctor to get it checked out, just making sure that it's you know, not cancerous in any way. I got checked out. They cleared me. Great. I took the VFR, and if you guys have the VFR, by the way, we're doing a VFR webinar next week. So hoping you guys can join us on that. If you guys don't have the VFR handpiece, because it's not FDA approved yet in the States, we will have it eventually though. So it's just nice if you just want to learn at this time. You're more than welcome to join us next week. But I took the VFR at a very short pulse duration, at a very superficial depth with a higher energy, and I pulsed. I'm not going to tell you it was comfortable because I didn't numb beforehand, but one treatment, it was gone. So if you guys have the VFR, it works really well for keratosis as well. And the skin came back, there was nothing crusty, came back completely normal, and it was completely gone one time. So that was great. If you don't have the VFR though, you have the IPL to treat it. Café au lait, a fancy word for birthmark. They're a bit harder to treat, but we have seen some good results with them. There's density to them, so make sure that you're starting with the 580 for safety because there's so much pigment in that area, and then you can move to the 530 once you get to the tail end of them. Okay, hemosiderin hyperpigmentation. So I'm not sure if you can see that photo very well. If you're on your phone, you probably can't. But it's kind of a bluish gray hue to it, and it's a mix of pigment and vascular. So this photo, this is someone that actually needs to see a medical professional, not something cosmetic, but it's a good photo of just showing like what it looks like, the color of it. I have gotten emails and questions to the clinical email address of pictures of people with their legs like this. And the question is, can we treat this? And the first thing I always tell them, because this can be common more so in the leg area, and the first thing I tell them is, or ask them, have they seen a vascular surgeon, vascular doctor, have had a venous Doppler, an ultrasound of their legs? Because you have to make sure that there's no venous insufficiency, and there usually is. Because if you're getting this hyperpigmentation on the skin, you can see a lot of the vascular lesions, and there's a lot of swelling, that is a sign of venous insufficiency. So they need to see more of a medical professional. If this happened, maybe they got hit by a baseball and they just got, you know, a lot of broken vascular and a lot of melanin in the area. So it has this kind of look. Yes, you can treat it. It's going to be harder to treat because there's so much density going on. But you would safely start with the 580, then you can move to the 530. It's going to be a lot more treatments. But this is not going to be common. Usually this is found in the legs, and it's more of a medical concern anyways. This is not common either, but you can treat it, Becker-Nevis or Becker-Nevis. This is going to be an overgrowth of cells in the area. So what it looks like is kind of a large birthmark. So it's dark, it's pigmented, it's raised though. So the skin is thicker in the area, and it's often hairy. So everything we want. Gray skin, pigmented, hairy, and it's because the cells, it's an overgrowth of cells. So it's the hair follicles, it's the skin in general, it's the melanocytes that are producing pigment. This is not going to be common. It's typically found in males, typically found on the torso or the arms, the upper body. But you can treat it with the pigment, with the hair removal, of course, starting much safer with the 580 for the pigment. You can move to the 530 if you need to at the end. You can do hair removal on it as well, but not as common. All right, so now we'll talk about endpoint. So endpoint, by the way, all of the endpoints for everything we're going to discuss today are very, very, very similar, where we want them to feel a mild sunburn sensation. We want to see erythema and edema, so redness and swelling on the tissue. But the difference, like hair, we also have another one, which is the smell of burnt hair. With pigment, we also have another one, and it's darkening of the pigment. So you have to make sure that you actually darken the pigmented lesions to know you have a really good endpoint. So sometimes it takes a bit longer because you're slowly testing. And again, adding on somebody's first treatment, 15 minutes to be able to test. You're going to test the same way though. So let's say I have just sunspots all over the side of my face, or both sides of my face. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the recommended jewel level. Oh, and by the way, please note this, that when you're using, or sorry, I should go back. When you're treating any pigment or vascular on the body, and you're really not treating much vascular on the body other than poikiloderma on the chest and neck. So we'll talk about that next. But if you're treating any pigment on the body, make sure that you're always dropping your recommended jewel level by 4. So if you put them in as a skin type 2 and it defaulted to 18 joules to start with, that is great for the face. Start there for the face. But when you're working the body burns much easier than the face. So always drop it by 4 joules. Okay, So, but let's say we're doing the face, and let's say that I'm a skin type 2, so it defaulted, sorry, my air freshener is going off. Let's say that we defaulted to 18 joules. I'm going to start there because I'm doing the face. And let's say we have very small, light solar lentigo spots, and we have an option between 10 and 50 milliseconds. Just making those numbers up again. Would you be closer to 50 milliseconds for testing, or would you be closer to 10 milliseconds for testing? We're going to be closer to 10 milliseconds. Why? Because they're small and light, so they're going to cool fast. So remember, I'm not testing at 10 milliseconds though, because that's too aggressive. So I'm going to test more at 20 milliseconds or 15 milliseconds for safety. Okay, so let's just say I chose 20 milliseconds. I'm going to pick 3, right? 1, 2, 3. Wipe off the gel. Did I see any redness? No. Or let's say I'm doing myself. So I saw no redness to the skin, and after a minute or two, I don't feel any sensation. What do? Remember, joules first. If we have no redness to the skin, what do we do first? We go up by 2 joules. So now I'm at 20. I pick a different spot. 1, 2, 3. Wipe off the gel. Okay, I see a little bit of pinkness to the skin. I feel a little tingling a minute or two later, but no heat, and I'm not seeing the pigment darken. So I got a bit of pinkness though, it faded, but I still got some redness. Now I only go up by 1 joule. So now I go to 21. 1, 2, 3, wipe off the gel. Ooh, now it's red. Now it's lasting. Let's say now I feel heat, but maybe it's like a 1 or 2, very little, and maybe it's starting to fade out. I look again, the redness is lasting, but the pigment's not darkening yet. Now what are we going to do? I found the energy to where it takes my skin to respond, which is, well, what was it? 21 joules. Great. Now I'm going to start adjusting my pulse duration. So maybe 20 milliseconds is too long. I'm going to go down to 15 milliseconds. Pick a different spot. 1, 2, 3. And by the way, you can test over here and over here. If you don't want to test like right in the middle of the skin, I always recommend testing on the side. Maybe they lied to you and they were in the sun. Maybe they lied to you and they were on Retin-A and you tested like right here and now they have a burn. Not a good place to have it. So testing on the side of the face is the best. So now I pick here, 1, 2, 3. Test, wipe the gel off. Now it's really nice and pink, and I wait a minute or two. I'm feeling some heat, like a bit more significant, maybe a 3, and I look and my pigment's starting to darken. Great, now I found my parameter. Now I just have to do 1 pass on the face with that parameter, which was 21 joules and 15 milliseconds. Do 1 full pass on the face, and then I look, and maybe some pigmented spots are not darkening as much here. I can go over it again a second time. That's okay. You can go back and spot treat, but you pretty much have your perfect parameter for the full face. Again, you would chart that, and I would know next time I do it, okay, this is my parameters. Test it again. If it responds the same, great. If it doesn't, get a little bit more aggressive at 10 milliseconds or 22 joules. So nice and easy for your next few treatments that are coming up. All right, and then the healing process. So it's going to start to look like little coffee grounds or peppering. So the next day they wake up and the spots are going to be really dark. So that's great. And then about 2 to 3 days later, they're going to start looking like those little coffee grounds. And that lasts for about 4, 5, 6 days. And then by a week, then those are gone. And now the pigment's just much lighter than when it ever started. For the body though, that healing process is 3 weeks. So make sure they don't come in and want all of their sunspots removed on their chest a week before a wedding and they have to wear a dress that's cut down. They're going to look a lot worse than they did when they first started. So 3 weeks that they're going to be dark and going through that healing process. And also make sure to tell them and have in your post-care guidelines, or have your post-care guidelines, because we created them for you guys. They're on the customer portal. If you're from overseas, then just ask your distributor to get them if you don't have them. But they're not using like any loofah, they're not picking at them, they're not scrubbing them off, they're using moisturizer to moisturize the area. But 3 weeks for that healing process on the body, a week for the face, which is great, it's quick. And they can wear makeup after, totally fine. High SPF 50, they can use moisturizer at night, that's great. Just no retinol. Okay, treatment course. Okay, it says 2 to 6 sessions. Now, we may be able to knock out just a few solar lentigo spots in 2 treatments. However, I wouldn't promise that because you just never know. So I would do more small packages of 4 if they just have a little bit of solar lentigo, and your larger package of 6 if they have something like melasma. If they have a lot of melasma and density on their face, then I would even bump that up to 8 just for safety. If you got rid of it in 6 or made it look a lot better and they're happy at 6, it's not a waste. Again, they can save these for maintenance or roll them over into another package of something else. Interval, 1 treatment every 4 to 6 weeks. It's more, does it say 3? Yeah, 3 to 6. It's more, think of it more as once a month. That's typical. It's just coming in monthly. If they're still not healed on the body for pigment and there's still some dark spots at 4 weeks, then push them out to another week or 2. And then maintenance is required. You know, a lot of these things are hormonal, so they can come back, or sun related, so it can come back. Genetics like freckles, they can come back. So maintenance is really, really varies. All right, so now I'll take any questions that you have for pigment. I'll take a sip of water while I give you guys time to write in before we go to vascular. Okay. Now we'll go into vascular lesions. So we have 2 filters for vascular 2 filters for vascular, which are the exact same filters as pigment. Oh, just got a question. Let's see. Oh, Q switched. Is that Q switched versus IPL for melasma? I think that was the question. Because it says India. Q switched India. Yeah, so Q switched. I think that's what you meant. If you also, here's the thing. So a Q switch laser works great for melasma, right? It breaks it up. Our VFR can work really great for melasma because it's ablative, so it can ablate the skin and work really well. The IPL can work really well. So you have a lot of options there. Here's the thing, the IPL is going to work really well. It gets very dark though. So if they have like big patches of melasma, when that darkens, it's very dark. Where like the VFR, and we don't have a Q switch, unfortunately, so I'm not quite sure how the healing is after a Q switch. But with melasma, we definitely darken it quite a bit with the IPL. With the VFR, we just have like the little matrix marks that go away in a week. So it's kind of the same thing. You either have matrix marks on the skin or you have darkened pigment. But if they prep the skin really well with those topical inhibitors, the IPL works really, 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 really good, really well with all of our studies. So it's kind of, you have different options, and so the Q switch works really well too, so I can't really say big pros and cons there. Like even with the VFR, I can't say big pros and cons there because they both work well. IPL, it's not uncomfortable. You don't have to numb the patient, which is great. With our VFR, the fractionated, it can be uncomfortable. So we have to numb them when we're getting into ablative temperatures. So that's one pro and con. How to treat customers with capillaries and melasma, which one is first? Oh, okay, so we're going to talk about that right now, actually. How to treat, did I get another one? No. No, okay. So we'll talk about that right now, actually. Okay, so same 2 filters for vascular as we use for pigment. Reason being, I'm going to show you guys the absorption chart really quick. Here we go. I wish I could zoom in. Shoot, won't let me. Okay, so very, very small. If you're on your phone, you can probably barely see this. But the wavelengths are here at the bottom of the chart. And then here's all of our chromophores for laser and IPL. We have water, we have oxyhemoglobin, we have hemoglobin, we have melanin. Now, if you look at like where the 530 filter is, it would be right about here. If you take that up, it's a really high peak of melanin, which is the purple or lavender, and it's a really high peak of hemoglobin. So that's why it works really well. That's why we have the same filter for pigment and vascular, because it wants to pull both. And then the 580 is right about here, same thing, really high peak of melanin and hemoglobin. So it's just one is deeper than the other. 530 stays a bit more superficial in the skin. 580 can reach a bit deeper into the tissue. But they both have really high peaks of melanin and hemoglobin. But you can see the 580 doesn't have as high of a peak of melanin. So that's why it's safer if something is dense and dark, or if someone in general is darker skin. All right. Now, the beauty of that, and kind of goes with your question, is let's just take somebody that has overall sun damage. Usually it's not just pigmented lesions that's the issue. Most of the time, they also have broken capillaries, because the sun will damage a lot of our skin. Our collagen, our collagen and elastin, our melanocytes, our broken capillaries and vascular within our tissue. So it does damage to all. So what's really great about that, though, is when we put in, let's say, the 530 filter, it is going to want to target both the vascular and pigmentation at the same time. So we're able to really clear both at the same time, which is great. Now, when you slide in the 530 filter, it's going to ask, what do you want to treat, pigment or vascular? So what do you choose? I always choose, what do they have more of? If it's more pigment, I choose pigment. If it's more vascular, I choose vascular. And I just go from there. Okay, so now let me just erase this that someone drew on the screen. When they draw on the screen, the reason why I keep erasing it is that it's not just on that page, it would follow us throughout. So if there's markings on the screen, then we'll see it the whole time. Okay, so now we'll talk about what are we actually doing to the vascular lesions. So our target is hemoglobin. It's very similar to the process of pigment, where it goes through that process of phagocytosis. Same thing with the vascular lesions. But what we're doing, our target is hemoglobin, and what we're doing is we're heating up the venule wall. And when we heat up the venule wall enough, then we get coagulation and necrosis of it. So we pretty much shut it down. It collapses, the blood will redirect, and then that vascular lesion, whatever it may be, is no longer of use to the body. So the body knows that, and then the body will naturally get rid of it over time. So that's what we're doing to vascular with hemoglobin. Now we'll go through the types of vascular lesions that we can treat. First one here, Gorbachev, port wine stain. Now, if they have a port wine stain that is like fully covering half of their face, so it's coming into their eye, no, I mean, the IPL is really not going to be able to treat the eye area. However, I'm going to start doing research on the dry area and treating eyelids, so you never know. But usually if someone has a port wine stain, a birthmark, then they usually get that taken care of when they're very young, and they usually sedate the patient, the young child, and they take special lasers to get rid of it around the eye. But if they have a port wine stain like this, Gorbachev, it's just right here, then yeah, we can treat it. Start safe though with the 580, then you can move to the 530. If you guys have the Nd:YAG can also be of help. So you really have multiple options here, but just always start safer with the 580 because it is a very dense hemoglobin area, and then you can move to the 530. Hemangiomas. Now this is a photo of a baby. You can tell just by looking at the skin. Excuse me, oh my gosh, my throat is so dry. Oh, somebody raised their hand. I don't know what to do when someone raises their hand. Let me see. Do I just click on it? I'm sorry, I see you're raising your hand, but I don't know what to do there. You can just write in a note if you'd like into the comment section. Excuse me, guys. Okay, so this is a photo of a baby, and this is more of like a strawberry hemangioma. It's larger. Those usually go away on their own when they have them as a baby. The types of hemangiomas or angiomas that we treat as adults or on adults are usually the cherry angiomas and the nodular angiomas. And there's no rhyme or reason why we get them. They pop up with age. So sorry, you guys. They pop up with age, and they're just little red dots, or they can be nodular, so they can be, you know, kind of coming out of the skin a bit. Now, you do not want to try to treat those on the body. They may look very small and like superficial. They're a little cherry angioma. They're just right there. I can just zap it. However, they have roots to them. And when they're on the body, they are deeper than they appear. So what ends up happening is you're trying to get rid of it, and you end up burning the surrounding tissue before you can ever get rid of the cherry angioma. So those, if you have the long pulsed IndiYAG, that's what you would use. It's just one zap. The long pulsed IndiYAG is 1064 nanometers, so it's a lot deeper. So one pulse, they turn brown or black, and you get rid of them that way. But if they have nodular or cherry angiomas on the face, those tend to be a bit more superficial, so you're able to treat them with the IPL. The 530 filter is typically the best, but of course you can always try the 580 as well. Now we'll go into, I need to crack my back. Now we'll go into telangiectasias. Now we made a note here, face only, but the IPL is not for the legs or leg veins. Again, if somebody has tiny little red spider veins on their legs and they look like, oh, they're just right there, I can treat them, you're going to end up creating a burn on them before you ever get the actual veins to coagulate. So face though, the face, really the long pulsed IndiYAG, that's what's used for leg veins because it has the depth and also the overall pressure within the vascular system of our legs. It's too great. And the long pulsed IndiYAG has that power to really shut down the veins in the legs. With facial veins though, there's not that case. They're not as deep as they appear. They don't have that pressure that the vascular system has in the legs. So really, if you have the long pulsed YAG, I wouldn't use it on the face because the IPL works much better. So the 530 filter is great for broken telangiectasias. Okay, Kuperos. So Kuperos, it is similar to rosacea, but you can see Kuperos just looks like a ton of broken capillaries in the area. So a lot of times it's found like on the cheek area, just a lot of broken capillaries. So when you're looking at that, keep in mind that broken capillaries on the face, they are typically very tiny. So when you look at that as an individual, you would think a short pulse duration. But always keep in mind, if they have Kuperos skin, that there are a ton of broken capillaries. So if you used a short pulse duration and you pulsed, remember all of those telangiectasias or capillaries would grab onto the heat all at the same time. And then it's too much heat really accumulates too much heat at the same time. So what happens is those will pop and you'll have a huge hematoma on the face because they all burst because they couldn't withstand that heat. You don't want that to happen. They don't want a big bruise or hematoma on their face like this patient that you're seeing. So really be very gentle, 530 filter, but starting out with a much longer pulse duration. Now, rosacea. So rosacea, it can be treated, but they are typically, I always recommend typically to put them on a monthly program because they can have flare-ups at any time. And the reason why we're saying the erythema from rosacea is we're not able to treat the rosacea. We can treat the redness, the flushness that they get to their skin or get on their skin, but we can't actually treat rosacea. So it can come back. And it can come back for multiple factors: hot weather, cold weather, exercise, spicy foods, alcohol, anything that's really vasodilating, they can have that flushness to their face. So it's nice for them to know that they're on a monthly program with you and that they can call you when they have that flare up. Now, we had 2 doctors from Asia do a kind of like a clinical case study on rosacea. And one of the physicians used the 530 filter for his rosacea patients, and the other doctor used the 580 for his rosacea patients. They both got a beautiful response with them. So you can really do both. However, I more so like the 580. And the reason being is a lot of times rosacea patients will get very dry skin. Like we were talking about the dry eyes, right? They will get very dry skin and almost like acne-like breakout. Like there's little almost like pimples, but they're not. So the 580, because it's used for skin rejuvenation, really rejuvenates the tissue really well to get rid of that really coarse, dry skin that they can have. And additionally, it gets rid of the redness. So, you know, we were talking about dry eyes, and then that ophthalmologist said that a big reason for dry eyes is the oil glands, or like maybe sebaceous glands or hydrogen bonds within our skin surrounding here can help. So the big thing is, how do we treat the eyelids, right? Without burning off the eyebrow and without pulsing on the eye. We would be able to do that if you're using things like shields. So shields, it's like a contact that you put actually in the eye and it shields the eye. So then we could avoid the brow and treat the lids and around without burning hair. But that's really what I'm thinking is the only way we could do it, is using a shield on the eye. But now going back to, okay, we could treat like dry eyes potentially, which is great. It also treats the dry skin of rosacea when you're using the 580. But if you're using the 580 and you're not getting a good response on that specific patient, switch it to the 530. You have something to, you know, you can adjust these things. Now we'll talk about hematomas and bruising. We can absolutely treat. So this was actually, I'll tell a quick story. This was actually a patient of mine at a training. So it was actually a patient of the doctor's that I was training. But they had dental work, like a really big dental surgery, and she was left with this huge hematoma on her face. This was like 2 weeks after the dental surgery. It wasn't going away. Her daughter's wedding was in London a week from that day, and she was really bummed out, right? That she's going to London, exciting, she's going to be in the wedding, but she has this huge hematoma. The doctor said, can we treat this for her? And I said, we didn't have a protocol yet. I was like, oh, we probably can. It's blood, right? It's hemoglobin. So I went home that evening to my hotel room, which is usually my home, and I researched it. And it said that the best wavelength for treating hematomas was between 570 nanometers to 590 nanometers. Wonderful. We have the 580. So came back the next day, we were training on the IPL, we brought her in, I didn't know what I was doing, so I just guessed. She was a very fair skin type, so I put it on single pulse, but I was very careful with my pulsation because it was huge, that I put it, I think at like 50, the highest millisecond I could put it on. And I didn't know what my endpoint was, so I just kept going, you know, testing, and I kept increasing my energy, and to the point where I just had overall redness surrounding the bruise, and that she felt mild sunburn sensation after, like I would do for anything else. And I wish I could show you the photos right now, but it broke up the bruise within 5 days and it was gone. It was amazing. So now we have a protocol for that. So now think like if you're doing the V-form contouring the lower face, or doing refit on the lower face, which is using a vacuum, think about your injectables and you're creating bruising. We can now treat this. So dental work that somebody has, if they just ran into their furniture in general, and you know their furniture attacks them, well, then we can treat it. So really great protocol there. So the 580 filter. Now we'll talk about poikiloderma. So poikiloderma is going to be probably your second most common thing to treat, other than solar lentigo, when they're coming in for like sun damage reasons. I have it, and a lot of women have it, and a lot of men have it. And it's where the term redneck came from. So if you guys are from overseas, maybe you haven't heard that term, but you can Google it. What is a redneck? You'll probably get a lot of funny things that pop up. But it was the case. The reason why they got the nickname redneck is it was typically like farmers working outside, and men typically have short hair, so the sun would beat down on them right here. So men typically have poikiloderma on their neck because of the sun beating down with their short hair. Where women, a lot of us have long enough hair to cover our necks, which is great, but we often wear things like I'm wearing right now. Pull it down a little bit. V-neck shirts. This is actually not a V-neck, but a lot of us wear these V-neck shirts, right? So we get sun damage here because we're not usually very careful. So this is where we'll end up with poikiloderma, and this is where I have it. So poikiloderma, it's mostly vascular, but it's also mixed with hyperpigmentation, hypopigmentation. So remember how I told you I had those hypopigmented spots. And it's also a different texture to the skin. It's, you know, I can feel my neck and it's just kind of soft and smooth. Then I come down here and it's more so like a rough, not like sandpaper, but like a rougher texture than anywhere else. And if you've seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But because it's primary vascular, that's how I treat it, is when I put in the filter, I choose vascular. You'll always want to start with the 530 filter because those broken capillaries are so superficial, and 530 filter and wavelength really targets them well. Also, it will target the hyperpigmentation. So 530 filter, get rid of all the vascular, get rid of the pigment, and then you can go back in and give some skin rejuvenation with the 580 just to help the overall texture of the skin. The only thing you really can't help, that texture will never go away, but you can improve it a little bit. The only thing that will never go away are those hypopigmented spots, unless the industry finds a solution. Okay, so we'll talk about endpoint and then we'll answer questions. So endpoint, you can see here, these were little broken capillaries in the area, but you can see they just look really angry. So kind of the same thing with pigment. You want them to darken. So it's gonna go from like a blood red to a deep, dark, coagulated red. Or they're gonna go from very light red capillaries where you can barely see them to much darker. Also, they typically have the redness, the erythema, that's surrounding them. So you can see here, these little broken capillaries, there's a lot of redness that's actually surrounding those vessels, and that's what you want. And then for them to feel a mild sunburn sensation, like everything else. Okay, treatment course is 4 to 8 sessions. I mean, if they just have a few broken capillaries like around their nose, then typically, yeah, 4 treatments would do it. But if they have like poikiloderma and it's solid red and solid pigment, then yeah, I would do more so like 8. Port wine stain, same thing. You're probably gonna have to use a mix of filters, maybe even your Nd:YAG at the tail end. So you would want to sell more. Interval will be 1 treatment every 3 to 6 weeks. Again, it's more just common to do every 4 weeks, and that's fine. And then maintenance is required. If you're doing a lot of injectables on them, we can create, you know, you guys as injectors can create broken capillaries. If they're still sun worshiping, then yes. Rosacea patients, they're usually coming in more often. All right, let's check questions now. Melasma, which one is first? Okay, so going back to this question, capillaries and melasma, which one is first? I would more so focus on the melasma first, because usually that's the bigger problem within the face, right? Usually there's more pigment than they are capillaries. So you may even be treating the capillaries with the melasma treatment. So they may just go away because the wavelength wants to target them anyways. But I would start melasma because I would start with whatever you have more of, and with melasma, it's more pigment than some broken capillaries. Okay, is it possible to treat customers post liposuction surgery? There's a patient post liposuction with bruises on his belly. It's been 5 months post liposuction operation. Absolutely, for sure. You know, some of our doctors will go off protocol and treat them pretty soon after, but that is very, you know, off protocol within Viora. 3 months is our waiting period post surgery. So he would be very, you know, he would be absolutely okay to have it done now. But it's a good thing, you know, with all that bruising, and then they're already uncomfortable after surgery, and then they have the bruising, which makes them even more uncomfortable, but it's a benefit to them, you know. So yeah, absolutely. All right, I think that's all the questions I have right now. Oops. All right, so we'll move on. All right, I have quite a few of you guys that stayed on the whole time. I'm so happy. The reason why I say that is some people are from overseas, so it's probably getting late. Okay, so now we will talk about skin rejuvenation. So I know someone had asked a question about that. Well, we talked a lot about what the 580 already does, right? The 580 already, we already know that it can treat pigment, it can treat, or I should say deep pigment, it can treat deep vascular, oh God, I can't talk anymore, you guys. How many hours have I been on? Many. But really what it was created for and what it's named for on the filter, it says SR, and it's skin rejuvenation. So when I think about skin rejuvenation, when I talk about this, I should go back. Skin rejuvenation can have different meanings. It could mean that you're looking at their face and they do have a lot of pigment and they do have a lot of vascular, that you need to, you know, overall give rejuvenation to the tissue to get rid of all of that. But I'm going to talk about it in a different way. I'm going to talk about it in the sense of we are rejuvenating the skin cells. Additionally, we have the heat to be able to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I'm losing words, you guys. I can't think right now. So I'll try to explain it without finding the word. Where I'm going to talk about collagen elastin and that it can help collagen elastin, but it's not going to help in the way that if someone comes in who's 60 years old and has a lot of lax, loose skin and deep lines, the IPL is not going to rejuvenate the skin to the point where it's going to bounce back. Where you need radio frequency to really properly target, because that's what RF is for, to be able to really properly go into the reticular dermis and into the papillary dermis, very specific, create the fibroblast cell stimulation, really start the neocollagenesis to really give lifting, okay? But if someone starts younger, for example, I started doing IPL skin rejuvenation treatments when I was 30. Now I'm 30, well, when I was 29, now I'm 39. So I've been doing it for 10 years. And I do it almost monthly. So just that little bit of heat, even though I'm not precisely using radio frequency to my collagen, I still have that dispersed heat within the skin. So I'm still targeting my collagen elastin a little bit to the point where I can keep my skin thicker. I can keep the collagen and elastin stronger. So this is going to be really good for patients to get on once a month, or if they can't afford or have the time to come in once a month, at least coming in once a season. So one time in the winter, one time in the spring, and one time in the fall, and one time in the summer, to really, when they're younger, to really do preventative measures, because it does have that heat that that heat that, I just had the word. Anyways, some heat that is able to target that collagen elastin. So this is great, again, starting younger for overall preventative. It does something else. It also targets the water in our skin cells. So when we do that, our keratinocytes, those are the skin cells that rejuvenate every 28 days. We're able to target those within the water within the skin cell. And we are able to get coagulation of those, and then our skin knows what to do. It renews. So we get renewal of skin cells. This is why we get an overall beautiful glow to the skin. Additionally, it shrinks the sebaceous glands, and it not so much shrinks, but it regulates. So if someone is very oily, then you have big pores. So me, for example, I'm very oily. So I naturally have much larger pores. Reason being is there's just more sebum within my pores. So they're kind of stretched out a bit. When I stay up on my monthly IPL treatments, which I haven't done it this month, and I was going to think I'm going to do it this weekend, so my skin will probably look very different on the webinars next week. Reason being is it's regulating my sebaceous glands, really shrinking them down, so my skin is not producing so much oil, and then the size of the pores shrink. So that's really, as a whole, rejuvenating skin cells, glow to the skin, smaller pores. and over time, just preventative with some heat in the collagen and around the collagen elastin. All right, but remember, someone comes in with loose sagging skin, RF is going to be your handpiece that you're going to go to for that issue, because it's very controlled and precise within the collagen layers. All right, so I'm going to talk about, remember how I said that the IPL primarily uses the visible spectrum, but we also use a little bit into the infrared spectrum, and why that's a positive. So when we put the filter in, it's not, I have the 415 filter in right now. When I put that 415 nanometer filter in, it's not just that wavelength. It's not just 450 nanometers that we're using, because it's an IPL, it's not a laser. We can't just use one we can't just use one wavelength. So let's say I put the 580 in. It actually goes from 580 all the way out to 1200, with most of our energy focused towards the 580 range. But there is some residual that goes out to 1200. Where that's a positive is skin rejuvenation. Why? Because the longer the wavelength, the higher the water peak. So if we put the 580 in, it goes out to 1200. Look at that peak of water. That's why it's so highly targeted to the water in our skin, and why we get such great skin rejuvenation effects. Also, why the long pulse Nd:YAG works really well for skin rejuvenation. It's 1064 nanometers. It's at this really high water peak here. So if you have both. All right. Sorry, this page just talks, this page just talks about aging. I'm sure all of us know that we have sun aging, and you know what it does, breaks down collagen, elastin, destroys our melanocytes, and vascular interface. And then we have chronological aging. Of course, we just age in general. Wish we could stop that. But you can really slow that down if you're not doing the sun stuff, and if you're doing treatments monthly. And by the way, next week on our webinar, we're doing a practice development one, and we're going to be talking about overall like memberships. So what they would come in to get, sorry, I feel like my hair is just getting bigger and bigger, what they would get monthly, and a membership that you can offer in your office that keeps people coming every month. And so, you know, really positives within a membership, and we'll talk about that next week. So we hope you can join us on the practice development one. We'll also talk about things that you can do for your business now while we're quarantined and stuck in our homes. And then also, once we get back to normal, things that you can do to really improve your business once you're in your office. Okay, so now we'll talk about endpoints. So your endpoint, let's say we don't have anything to darken. It's just overall rejuvenation of our skin cells. Then it's just going to be overall redness with a mild sunburn sensation. That's it. Maybe a little swelling. So nice and easy endpoint there. And then the treatment course is going to be 4 to 6 sessions. And by the way, with skin rejuvenation, once you find their parameters to where they get nice and pink and have a mild sunburn sensation, you can keep it there always, because you don't need to adjust it to darken things or get rid of hair. Their parameters can just stay the same. So it's really nice and easy. One pass, they're out the door. You didn't have to do anything different. Interval can be 1 treatment every 2 to 4 weeks. Usually they do not need that. Where this is a positive is when I talk about acne and combining an acne filter with skin rejuvenation. But if they're just overall skin rejuvenation, then monthly is completely fine. That's enough. And then maintenance, 1 session every 3 to 6 months or as required. You guys know my thoughts on that. Once a month is really wonderful for the skin. If they can't afford to do that, or they don't have time for that, then once a season, it should be done once a season, because it really does make a huge difference with our skin quality and texture. Okay. Any questions on skin rejuvenation before we go to acne? Okay, just got one. Just giving time for people to type. A little comparison between BBL and IPL. In SR. I mean, honestly, they're very similar. It's, you know, BBL is broadband light, which is the same as IPL, intense pulse light. So it really, here's what it depends on, is what wavelengths are they using? We have that perfect wavelength, 580, that goes out to 1200 to give really beautiful skin rejuvenation. But a lot of times, like BBL may have a similar filter. They're pretty much the same thing. I would say, you know, big differences is looking at, for us, within Viora, is our comfort. We never are to the point where we have to use numbing cream for somebody. It's very rare unless they're very sensitive, because we have both types of cooling to keep them comfortable. And then of course the safety of it, that we have the different pulse configurations to be able to treat every skin type, but also going into comfort, that we have the different pulse configurations to keep them even comfortable if we want to move from single to multiple. With also our pulse duration. So how we're adjusting our pulse duration with skin rejuvenation is, our target is water. So do we need a short pulse duration or a long pulse duration? I always keep it to a long pulse duration, because for their overall comfort. The longer the pulse duration, the more comfortable somebody is. Because also, think about that Mike Tyson punch. When we shorten the pulse duration, it's Mike Tyson with a strong, heavy punch. When we lengthen the pulse duration, it's more of a tap to the tissue. So we have that ability. We can really lengthen the pulse duration because we're not needing to darken anything. We're going for overall water in the skin. The only time you're ever really needing to decrease the pulse duration is if we're not getting the redness to the tissue and we're getting higher in our energy. Okay, maybe we do need a bit of a shorter pulse duration just to get them to that mild sunburn sensation or overall lingering redness. But, you know, very, very similar, other than we do have these differences within the IPL for comfort and safety. If you're looking at it more from like a sales standpoint, we have been talking about doing a sales webinar as well for the distributors. So we'll definitely notify you if we do something like that, where we can really break down like comparisons across the board with not just BBL, but other systems. But, you know, similar. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so now, acne. Okay, so acne, I highly, highly recommend, and this is really for everything, is to not just do it as a standalone. It's not just the 415 and you're done. Acne is challenging, and there's a way of really being able to get acne under control well, and that's a combination of different things. So I'll talk about that in just a bit when we start talking about why do we have acne and then why do we combine these things. So acne, we're using the 415 nanometer filter, which is blue light and specific. I didn't talk about the other colors of the rainbow for the other filters, but we really need blue light and specific to properly target acne. And the reason being is acne is the only one that gives more of a chemical reaction than a thermal reaction. So everything else, we were doing light, heat, destruction. With this one, it's actually chemical. So we'll talk about how that works as well. So here's the Burton scale for acne, very small. I know you guys can barely see it. I'm so sorry that I can't zoom in. I don't know why. But we are able to treat up to grade 4. We are not able to treat grade 5 and 6. The reason being is that is when you get into systemic acne, where it's nodular and cystic. So 2 reasons why we can't treat it. We don't have the depth of penetration with the 415 nanometer, because it's the most superficial, to really target the cystic and nodular acne as a whole. Additionally, it's systemic. You could do blue light on them all day long, and it's most likely not going away. I had this type of acne growing up, and I had to get on Accutane. They tried everything. They tried antibiotics. They tried retinols. And then it got to the point where, you know, you have the type of acne that, you know, nothing is going to help. That kind of like topical or even oral, such as antibiotics. So they had to put me on Accutane to be able to get it under control. So That's really why we can't treat it. But we can treat up to grade 4, which I wish you could see this photo. It's still pretty bad. And then if on the system, when you put the 415 filter in, it will ask you, is it mild or moderate? Moderate is considered grade 4. So if you can't see this photo, you can even Google it. And then mild is going to be considered grades 1, 2, and 3. All right. Now, how are we treating the acne? What we are targeting, it's called porphyrin right here. And that is found in P. acne bacteria. And its job is oxygen. It's also found in red blood cells, so oxygen. And what we are doing with blue light, and we don't know why, but blue light and porphyrin have a love affair. They are attracted to one another. So when we put blue light on an acne lesion, we know there's porphyrin inside there. We activate it. And the reason why we even have acne, I'm going to show you this photo here, is that we have a plug over a pore and we have overactive sebaceous glands, usually, like mine. And when we get a plug over a pore, it could be dirt, it could be debris, it could be makeup, but what typically is creating the plug over the pore are dead skin cells. And when we have overactive sebaceous glands, those dead skin cells block the pore, and there's no longer any oxygen in there. So that plug, no oxygen, it's a breeding ground for bacteria. So that's where we get these acne lesions, acne breakouts. So when I was talking about doing combination, is I would always do a microdermabrasion if you have Viora's pristine, or if you do like dermaplaning. I would only dermaplane if I did not have a microdermabrasion, because the microdermabrasion is just a quick, easy prep to the skin, where dermaplaning is going to take you a while. So quick, easy microderm. Don't be too aggressive on the active acne lesions, just very mild. But you really want to do a good microderm, quick one, but a good one on areas that don't have the breakout as well, because you know that those dead skin cells, if I don't remove them now, could end up creating a breakout in a couple days in other areas. So, you know, definitely do a microderm everywhere. Very important to have. And then what we're doing is removing the dead skin cells, then taking the blue light, activating porphyrin within the P. acne bacteria. And when we activate porphyrin, porphyrin then releases oxygen. And then the oxygen helps fight that acne bacteria. Additionally, so really the inflammation is going to go down right away. It typically looks a lot better that evening, that next day. So unlike pigment, where it doesn't look better the next day, it looks worse, it's darker. Same with vascular. Skin rejuvenation, your skin will look beautiful the next day, so there's no downtime there at all. Acne, there's not going to be any as well, because the acne lesions really calm down after you've attacked it with blue light. Oh my gosh, you guys, sorry. I'm getting all jumbled up with my words. So after you do a quick microderm, then go in with the blue light. I highly recommend, and here's another thing. Because acne is a chemical response and not a thermal response, they never hold heat for too long after. Your endpoint may be getting to a little bit of heat, but it never lasts because it's more of a chemical reaction. So it's very safe to then go in with the 580 filter, because remember, the 580 filter regulates the sebaceous glands. Also, the 580 filter will help any type of scarring they may have or could potentially have in the future. So it's just a really good combination altogether. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that here on the acne treatment schedule, treatment course 8 to 10, but intervals are 2 treatments per week. Now, if they don't have time to come in twice a week, a lot of people don't, then it's okay, at least come in once a week. That's very important. But they can come in twice a week if they have time. So you can't do the 580 filter every time they come in, and you can't do a microderm every time they come in. So let's say you put them on this program and they're coming in once a week. It would be week 1, the very first time they come into you, microderm, then the 415, then the 580. The next week they come in, just the 415. The next week they come in, microderm, 415, then the 580. Next time they come in, just the 415. So it just alternates that way between that. Combination, just the 415. Combination, just the 415. So that's a good program to put them on if they have acne. Your endpoint is kind of cool with acne. So it's going to be overall heat, like a little bit of heat and a little bit of heat that they feel. Doesn't linger too long though. And a big one is if they have acne that is sensitive to the touch, so it's sore, I'll put gloves on them. I'll put gloves on myself. I'll push and kind of feel. And I also kind of have them push and feel and remember this, how sore it is. So if they have that sensitive to the touch acne, push on it and kind of get a sense of how sore it is. With acne, this is the only one that you're really having to do multiple passes. Because the way I spoke about all the other ones is that you take your time, find your parameter, and then you only need to do one pass. You can always spot treat somewhere else if you need to. With acne, you really are needing to do at least 4 passes. For me, for example, I have to do up to 10 to get a response. So there's a lot more passes. So your endpoint also is going to be overall like redness and swelling, but acne is already red and swollen, right? So only pick one part of the face. So you have something to compare it to because you want it to be even more red, even more swollen. So you want to be able to go back and forth and kind of assess, okay, now it's starting to look more and more red and swollen compared to the side I didn't do. So what I do is I do a couple passes, wipe off the gel, see if there's any redness, see if they feel any heat, then push on the acne. If I ask them, is it still sore? Yeah. Okay. Put gel on, do a couple more passes, wipe off the gel, see if there's any redness, see if they feel any heat, have them push on it. Is it still sore? Yes. Do you have any lingering heat? No. Okay, couple more passes, wipe off the gel, see if there's some pinkness to the skin, see if they feel some mild heat, have them push on it. When they say it's numb, oh, wow, I can no longer feel it. It's no longer sore. That's your perfect endpoint. Chart that. Did it take you 8 passes to do? Make sure you know that so you don't have to test this every time they come in. You can just do it really quick, 8 passes, and then be done with it. Then you know, okay, it took 8 passes over here. Just come on over to this side, do your quick 8 passes, come over to the areas that they may have a breakout here, do your 8 passes. Then you're done, wipe off that gel, put new gel on because acne, you don't want to reuse that gel. You want clean gel just because there's bacteria going on. So wipe off that gel, put clean gel on, and then do the 580. Hope that makes sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I know that one's usually a lot. So that being said, while you guys are writing in your questions, I recommend like the microderm for anything. If you're doing hyperpigmentation or especially skin rejuvenation, because when you remove the dead skin cells, first of all, microderm, it's just going to make the skin look much better anyways. It's, you know, it removes those dead skin cells so they have that beautiful glow to their skin. But with microderm, there's a vacuum, so it increases circulation. When you do that, you get an overall just better response to the light that you're putting into it. It also increases oxygen and nutrients to the tissue. Additionally, because it removes the dead skin cells, light naturally wants to scatter. So when you do not use ultrasound gel, for example, you're only getting about 30% of that energy instead of like 70% if you had gel, because light will always scatter. So the ultrasound gel is reducing that scatter and allowing really the energy to come down into the tissue. Now, dead skin cells also create a barrier where you get more light scatter. So when you don't have those dead skin cells, you just get better absorption in general. So it's just always a microdermabrasion. We have an amazing one called the Pristine. Always is a good idea to have for any type of prep to the skin for whatever you're doing, because you're just going to get better results in general. Okay, when you gave the week 1 through 4 treatment schedule, is that if they just came in once a week? Yeah. That's if they just came in once a week. If they wanted to come in more often, then just make sure you're doing your microderm and the 580 just once every 2 weeks. And then you can mix in the 415 a couple times a week. Hillary, I love your questions, by the way, and I love that you're on all the webinars. I hope you're enjoying them. Okay, so really we completed everything. And I spoke about, like, you know, sunscreen and not scrubbing the face and retinols and things like that. We talked about spray tan, and we will be going through all contraindications on the practice development Skype. So, you know, some of them are a bit different per handpiece. So we'll go through, we incorporated the contraindications and the consent forms within the practice development. So hope you guys join us next week for that. And if you guys are wondering the schedule for next week, you can visit www.vioraonlineacademy.com. I forgot for a second. Vioraonlineacademy.com, and you can see the schedule coming up. And remember today, Instagram Live, I will have a cocktail in hand, and we're going to do cocktails with Kara. Really any questions that you guys have involving any hand pieces. So that will be fun. Hope you guys join us on that one. We're probably all sitting at home having cocktails in the evening anyways, since we're stuck. Might as well learn. Okay, this is a time, I love that you guys are writing in questions, but this is also a time where you can unmute yourself. So if you guys want to ask a question, not having to type it out, and I love that when we have that talk back and forth, you guys are more than welcome to unmute, ask your questions. Thanks so much. I learned something new on each webinar. Oh, good. That makes me so happy, Hillary. Hillary, what's your office name? Your practice. River Valley Dental. Oh, great. Anybody want to unmute? Any questions? It's funny, I was saying this the other day, the very first week that I did these, there were so many people that did unmute and ask questions. But this week, everyone's pretty quiet. Someone raised their hand. I don't know how to work the raise the hand thing. I'm clicking on it, and it's not working. So you can unmute, if you're on your computer, it's down at the, oh, I hear somebody.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I love your entire presentation, but I had a question. It's not about the presentation.
Okay.
I was wondering if you give any certificates or any sort of proof that I attended this meeting.
You know, let me look into that, because usually for us to legally certify, it also includes hands-on. So for example, like when we hold the Viora academies in all the cities, we're doing hands-on and teaching, so we're able to certify. So I know that they're not going on right now, unfortunately, because we're on lockdown. So let me look into like what kind of certification we can give. So for you, why don't you email clinicalusa@vioramed.com. Let us know that you were the one asking, and we can definitely look into it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, Kara.
I think oh, hi. Wait, sorry, let me just say one thing, and then I want to hear your question. I think it might be hard, though, to mail the certificates, like to get them out because of everything that's going on. But, you know, we'll look into it. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Is this Omar?
Yeah, Omar.
Oh, hi.
Thank you for the presentation. Actually, IPL here is coming back to the market in a very good way, especially for pigmentation and also for acne.
Oh, yeah, great.
My question and what we experienced here in the market that it's very, very important to wear a sunscreen after IPL, because really the things can happen right after the procedure. Plus, I have a question like, what recommendations for topicals with acne treatment?
Oh, good question. Good question.
Thank you, Kara.
Yeah, thank you so much, Omar. We miss you. So Omar is in Dubai. So it's very sunny. It's like Las Vegas. When I went there, I was like, oh, I kind of feel like I'm home because it's desert and it's sunny. So yes, I mean, like somewhere like there, if you guys are overseas and places like that, I mean, you cannot stress enough about sunscreen. Topicals with acne. Oh gosh, I wish I had really good recommendations, and I don't think I do. It's something I'm gonna have to look into, because I can say like good things for acne are retinols, because it keeps the skin cells dead skin cells away and helps really shrink sebaceous glands. But retinols don't always work, so that's when you can do like blue light and the 580, and they can't be on retinol when you're doing these treatments, right? By the way, if anybody has
Maybe
good,
some antibacterials.
I know, it's a really, really, really good question, and it's something that I haven't been faced with yet, a question I haven't been faced with yet. So what I'm going to do, Omar, just because I do not want to give you the wrong answer, is one, I'm going to ask everybody on here, do you guys have things that you recommend? Additionally, I am going to research, and I am going to email you once I have a very good answer. Is that okay?
Great. Thank you. We'll be waiting. Thanks.
Do you forgive me?
Of course. No, it's not like this. Thank you so much. Thank you always.
Yeah, no, of course.
We'll keep in touch.
Okay, I'm going to look at the chat, and you guys can unmute yourself if you guys have really good recommendations. I'm going to speak to a couple of our dermatologists who take care of acne a lot, that could really give me the good products to pair with these treatments. Let me see. When you gave, okay, please move to webinar and diode laser. Okay, I got one that's, sorry, people are writing in, so then it moves my, please conduct a webinar on diode laser. You are a great speaker. Thank you so much, I really appreciate that. So the Diode Breeze that we have, that's a good idea to hold a webinar on that. It will probably be a bit down the road. So keep looking at our schedule, the Viora online academy.com, and see if we have one pop up. But it's a great idea, and we may add that on down the road. Sounds like we're on lockdown for a long time, so we'll probably mix it up and do different types of webinars. But thank you so much for that compliment. It's so sweet. Let's see. Thanks so much. I learned something new on YouTube. Oh, read that. Sorry. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for a great webinar. You make it so interesting and easy to follow. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You guys are so kind. Thank you. Please. Oh, got that one. Is there a training on the pristine? We are thinking of adding that. Oh, that's a great one too. We were actually talking about that last week, of adding on the pristine. The issue is, the pristine, it's really easy just to talk, like I could explain it in 30 minutes. It's more of like the technique, I think. And with social distancing, it's, I can look into maybe having my mom, because that's the only really person that I'm seeing is my mom, that, I'm going over to her house, that maybe she could come to mine and I could do a microdermabrasion on her live during the webinar. So that might be something. I just have to look into that, just because things are a bit more complicated right now. I could maybe even do it on myself. that might work. So yeah, so just check the Viora Online Academy and see kind of like the weeks to come, things that pop up that we're gonna do. But yes, of course, great idea. All of them are diode and pristine. And it's such an amazing device. Oh, you do need it. Thank you, Kara. Such an amazing session. Love it. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. You guys are brightening up my day with this trapped in the house alone on quarantine. I don't even have a dog because I travel too much. So this is so sweet and kind. Thank you, Kara. You're an amazing speaker. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Kara, for the amazing presentation as usual. Thank you, guys. Thank you for all the thank yous. Okay, I'll just wait just one more second, see if anybody unmutes themselves. Any live questions? No? All righty. So no more that are typed in. Okay, so I guess we're gonna wrap it up then. I'll wrap it up how I usually do with, we love you so, so much. And you are truly part of our family, our Viora family. And of course, we just want to keep supporting and supporting and supporting. So all these ideas that you guys have been sending in, they're so great. And we want to be able to support you as much as we can throughout this pandemic. So definitely keep checking online and seeing what's to come. But we really do love you guys, and we really, really want to be there for you throughout this whole thing. Holding your hand, virtually hugging you guys. I miss all of you. I miss human faces very much, but I know you're right there, so it makes me feel better. All right, you guys, stay safe and stay healthy, please. And we will see you next week for practice development, which is really good. I highly recommend being on that one. I have two guests that join me, two of my clinical trainers that own their own very successful med spas. So they give really great recommendations. So it's the three of us that are hosting together, going through a lot of different things, how to take perfect before and after photos, you know, proper ways of doing it, how to chart, how to hold consultations, how to pricing strategies and memberships, and a lot more, you know, things that you can be doing now to help your business grow, even when we're all kind of shut down. All right, you guys, mwah, and we'll see you next week, and have a good weekend. Okay, talk to you later.